When a man in a plain gray hoodie walked up to the front desk of one of the most expensive hotels in California, nobody looked twice. He had no bodyguards, no camera crew, no fancy luggage, just one small duffel bag, and a quiet smile. He parked his own car in the regular parking lot, not the valet. He carried his own bag. He asked for a room just like anyone else would. The young man behind the desk looked at his computer screen. He looked back at the guest. He typed some more. Then he said the words that would change everything that happened next. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have a reservation for you tonight. And the hotel is completely full." The man in the gray hoodie didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand to speak to a manager. He just nodded slowly, picked up his bag, walked across the lobby, and sat down in a chair by the window. And he waited. For 47 minutes, he sat in that chair, alone, quiet, watching the fog roll in over the vineyard outside. He helped a little girl tie her shoe. He drank a glass of water. He looked out the window like a man who had all the time in the world. Nobody on that staff knew who he was. Nobody, except for one person. A 22-year-old woman who had only been working at that hotel for 6 weeks. A woman who was still in her first job, still too nervous to speak up, still not sure she had earned the right to say anything at all. But something told her to look closer, so she did. And what she found on her computer screen in the next 30 seconds made her grip the edge of the front desk to stop herself from falling over. Because the man they had just turned away, the man sitting quietly in the lobby chair in his worn-out sneakers and plain gray hoodie, helping a stranger's child tie her shoe, was not just any guest. He was Steph Curry, 4-time NBA champion, the greatest shooter in the history of basketball, a man worth over $160 million. And he wasn't just a guest at the Grand Pelican Resort. He was the owner. The staff had just turned away the owner of their own hotel, and he had said nothing, not one word. He had simply sat down and waited, patient and calm and quiet, in the lobby of a building that belonged to him. Now here is where the story gets truly incredible. Because what happened next, what that 22-year-old woman decided to do, what the general manager did when he got the phone call at 9 o'clock at night, what the chef in the kitchen sent out when the restaurant had already closed, and what Steph Curry left on the front desk the very next morning inside a plain white envelope with one name written on the front, is the kind of story that reminds you what people are actually capable of when they choose to do the right thing. This is not just a story about a famous basketball player being turned away from a hotel. This is a story about what it means to truly see another human being. And trust me, you are going to want to watch every single second of what happens next. It was the kind of evening that made Napa Valley look like a painting. The sun was going down slow behind the hills, painting the sky in orange and pink. The grapevines along the Silverado Trail were turning gold, the way they only do in October, right before the harvest ends and the valley goes quiet for winter. The air smelled like oak and earth, and something sweet that you couldn't quite name, but made you want to breathe deeper. It was Thursday, October 12, 2023, and somewhere on that road, a blue Porsche Taycan was moving quietly through the evening light. No music playing too loud. No rushing, just a man driving himself, alone, through one of the most beautiful places in California, and not making a single thing about it. The man behind the wheel wore a plain gray hoodie, the kind you buy because it's comfortable, not because of the brand on the chest. His sneakers were worn, broken in the way athletes' shoes get when they've been used for real, not just for show. He had a small duffel bag in the back seat. One bag, no suitcase, no assistant riding shotgun, no security detail following in a second car. Just a man, just a bag, just a drive. When the Grand Pelican Resort appeared on the right side of the road, its long stone driveway lined with olive trees and soft lantern lights, its tall glass front catching the last pink glow of the sunset, the man in the hoodie turned in calmly, like he had done it 100 times before. He pulled past the valet station without stopping. He drove himself to the self-parking lot, found a space, and cut the engine. He sat in the quiet for just a moment, the way people do when they've been moving all day, and the stillness feels almost strange. Then he picked up his duffel bag, stepped out into the cool October air, and walked across the parking lot toward the front entrance of the hotel. No announcement, no fanfare, just footsteps on stone. To understand why this night mattered so much, why this ordinary-looking walk across a hotel parking lot would end up meaning something far bigger than a missed reservation, you first have to understand who this man was when nobody was watching. His name was Wardell Stephen Curry II. The world knew him as Steph Curry. If you followed basketball even a little, you knew the highlights. You knew the shimmy. You knew the three-pointer launched from so far back that the whole arena held its breath before it swished through the net. You knew the 4 NBA championships with the Golden State Warriors in 2015, 2017, 2018, and 2022. You knew he was the first unanimous MVP in NBA history, voted so by every single voter in the entire league in 2016, something that had never happened before in the award's 60-year history. You knew he held the all-time record for three-pointers made, a record he broke on December 14, 2021, in Madison Square Garden, in front of a crowd that gave him a standing ovation even though he played for the visiting team. Forbes had estimated his net worth at over $160 million. Brands like Under Armour, Chase Bank, and Nissan had built entire campaigns around his image. His media and investment company, SC30 Inc., founded in 2020, had its hands in everything from film and television to food and hospitality. By every measure the outside world uses to count success, Steph Curry was at the very top. But here is the thing about Steph Curry, that the highlight reels do not show you. His childhood pastor at Calvary Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, a warm, soft-spoken man named Reverend Dale Okafor, once gave an interview in 2019 in which he was asked to describe the young Stephen Curry he had watched grow up in the pews of that church. Reverend Okafor thought about it for a long moment before answering. Then he said, "Stephen never forgot where he came from. He just never needed you to know where he was going." That was the man walking through the front doors of the Grand Pelican that Thursday evening. Not the MVP, not the champion, not the brand, just a man in a worn gray hoodie who had driven himself to a hotel, parked his own car, and was carrying his own bag. He had been in Napa Valley for business. His company, SC30 Inc., had been in meetings earlier that day with a group of private business partners. Conversations about the kind of long-term investments that don't make headlines but slowly, quietly, build something lasting. The meetings had been scheduled to run until 8 in the evening. They had finished at 6, 2 full hours early. His assistant, a sharp, dependable young woman named Brianna Tesler, who had worked with Steph's team since 2021 and was known for being so organized she sometimes sent calendar reminders for the calendar reminders, had already arranged everything. His usual suite at the Grand Pelican was booked and waiting. The Monarch Suite on the 5th floor, a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a private terrace that looked out over the vineyard rows, a stone-soaking tub, and a king bed with linens so good they felt like sleeping inside a cloud. It was always reserved under the name Wardell, his legal first name, as a simple layer of privacy. No Steph Curry in the system, no Stephen Curry, just Wardell, one name, clean and quiet. Brianna had booked it weeks ago. There was only one problem. A single, small, entirely innocent problem. The kind that happens to careful people on busy days when the numbers all start to blur together. Brianna had typed the check-in date as October 13th, not October 12th, tomorrow, not today, one digit, one day, one mistake. She had no idea. She was at home in the Bay Area, probably finishing dinner phone nearby but not yet checked. Steph hadn't called her. He never liked making his team feel bad about small things. He had always said that the people who work hardest are the ones who make the most mistakes, because they're the ones actually doing things. So he hadn't texted her yet. He figured it would sort itself out at the front desk. It was a hotel. There would be rooms. He wasn't picky. He just needed somewhere to sleep. The lobby of the Grand Pelican was the kind of space that made you slow down without meaning to. The ceiling was high and warm lit, made of wood beams that arched overhead like the inside of a wine barrel. The floors were pale limestone. There were fresh flowers everywhere, white and cream, in tall glass vases. Soft music played from somewhere you couldn't quite locate, which was the point. The whole room smelled faintly of cedar and white tea. On the walls were photographs, not of celebrities, not of the resort's awards or press clippings, just photographs of the valley, of workers in the vineyards at sunrise, of fog over the hills at dawn, of tables set for small dinners under string lights. It felt, more than most luxury hotels, like someone had actually thought about how it should feel to be there. Someone had. But we'll get to that. At the front desk stood a young man named Marcus Delwood. Marcus was 24 years old. He had grown up in Vallejo, California, a working-class city about 30 miles south of Napa. He had put himself through a 2-year hospitality program at Napa Valley College, graduated near the top of his class, and landed the job at the Grand Pelican 8 months ago. It was the best job he had ever had, and he knew it, and he treated it accordingly. Marcus was professional. He was precise. He was proud of doing things the right way. He had learned, early in his life, that rules were not the enemy. Chaos was. Rules were what separated a smooth-running evening from a complete disaster. Rules protected the guests. Rules protected the staff. Rules were, in Marcus's mind, the architecture of a well-run world. He believed this completely. He was not wrong to believe it. He was just about to learn something that rules alone can never teach you. The man in the gray hoodie approached the front desk. He set his duffel bag gently on the floor beside him. He put both hands lightly on the edge of the marble counter. He smiled. The easy, unforced smile of someone who has genuinely had a good day and isn't yet expecting the evening to be complicated. "Hi," he said. "I'd like to check in, please." Marcus looked up. He took in the guest the way trained front desk staff are taught to, quickly, professionally, without staring. He saw the hoodie, the worn sneakers, the single small bag, no suit, no watch that announced itself, no energy of a man who expected to be recognized. "Of course," Marcus said. "Do you have a reservation with us?" "I do," the man said. "Under the name Wardell," Marcus typed. His eyes moved across the screen. He typed again, slightly differently. His brow creased. Just a small crease, the kind you make when the system isn't doing what you expected. He typed a third time. Then he looked up. "Sir, I'm not finding an active reservation under that name for tonight. It might be under a first initial." "Just the W." The man leaned a little on the counter, not impatiently. More like the way you lean when you're trying to be helpful. Or try October 12th specifically. "I think there might be a date issue." Marcus checked again. He found it this time. The reservation existed, clearly, in the system. The Monarch Suite. The name Wardell. Everything looked right except one thing. The check-in date said October 13th. "I found the reservation," Marcus said. "But it begins tomorrow evening, sir. Tonight shows as October 12th, and your booking starts October 13th. "Ah," the man nodded. Not upset. Just nodding. The way you nod when something makes sense even though you wish it didn't. "Is there any way to get me in a room tonight? I'm honestly not picky. Anything available. Doesn't have to be the suite." Marcus turned back to his screen. He checked room availability with the focus of someone who already knew the answer before he looked. The resort was at full capacity. 112 rooms, 112 occupied. Not a single vacancy. Marcus straightened up. He folded his hands on the counter in the way his training had taught him. Firm, polite, clear. "Sir, I understand the situation, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Unfortunately, the property is completely full tonight. Hotel policy does not allow early check-ins when we're at capacity, and I'm unable to override the system without a current reservation." He said it cleanly, correctly, without a single word out of place. The man across the counter looked at him, not with anger, not with the sharp, dangerous stillness of someone getting ready to raise their voice and ask for a manager, not with any of the reactions Marcus had been trained to handle and had handled before. He looked at Marcus the way a very patient teacher looks at a student who has given a technically correct answer to the wrong question. "That's okay," the man said quietly. "I understand." He picked up his duffel bag. He stepped back from the counter, and he walked across the limestone floor to a tall velvet armchair near the window, the one that looked out directly over the dark vineyard rows and the low fog beginning to roll in from the hills. He sat down. He did not call a manager. He did not raise his voice. He did not pull out his phone to make a dramatic call to someone powerful. He did not announce his name. He did not say a single word about who he was, or what he owned, or what any of it meant. He simply sat and waited. Across the lobby, near the far end of the front desk, a young woman had watched the entire exchange. She was 22 years old, 6 weeks on the job, still in her probation period, still learning which questions she was allowed to ask out loud. Her name was Amara Ngozi. She watched the man settle into the chair. She watched him put his duffel bag between his feet. She watched him look out the window at the darkening vineyard with an expression that was not defeat. It was something closer to patience. The deep, practiced patience of someone who had learned a long time ago that the world did not always open its doors on your schedule. Something in her stomach turned over. Not loudly, just a small, quiet turn. The feeling you get when you know something is wrong, but you're not yet sure what you're supposed to do about it. Then a small voice broke the silence of the lobby. "Are you sad?" A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with a red bow in her hair and the serious face of a child who asks important questions, had wandered over from the seating area, where her mother was distracted with luggage. She stood directly in front of the velvet chair, staring at the man in the gray hoodie, with complete and honest curiosity. He looked at her, and he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, surprised and warm and full. The laugh of a man who had not expected that question from that direction, and found it to be exactly the right thing to hear. "No, sweetheart," he said. "I'm not sad." "Then what are you doing?" she asked. "I'm just thinking." She scrunched her nose. "About what?" He glanced back at the front desk, at the door Marcus had gone through, at the marble counter where 7 quiet words had led to a chair by a window instead of a room with a view. "About how, sometimes," he said, "the right doors take a little longer to open." The girl thought about this very seriously for a moment. Then she nodded, as though it made complete sense, and went back to her mother. The man in the gray hoodie looked back out at the vineyard. The fog was coming in now, low and white across the dark rows. He was in no hurry. He had learned a long time ago, in a gymnasium in Charlotte, in a locker room in Oakland, in 100 rooms that hadn't been ready for him when he arrived, that the waiting was never wasted. It was always preparation for what came next. At the front desk, Amara Ngozi pulled up a search on her terminal. She typed 3 words, and everything, for everyone in that building, was about to change. At the front desk, Amara Ngozi pulled up a search on her terminal. She typed 3 words, and everything, for everyone in that building, was about to change. The Grand Pelican Resort was not the kind of place that happened by accident. Every single thing about it, from the arch of the wooden ceiling beams to the temperature of the lighting, to the exact height of the flower arrangements on the check-in counter, had been chosen deliberately, carefully, with the kind of attention that most people reserve for things they deeply, personally love. It had opened its doors in the spring of 2019, designed by celebrated San Francisco architect Nadia Sorrentino, whose firm was known for building spaces that felt, as one design magazine put it, like the landscape itself had decided to become a room. The resort sat on 47 acres of Napa Valley wine country land, just off the Silverado Trail, that long, winding road that runs through the heart of the valley like a spine, with vineyards stretching out on both sides as far as the eye can follow. 112 rooms, a rooftop infinity pool that seemed to pour directly into the vineyard horizon. A private wine cellar experience where a sommelier walked you through bottles older than most buildings in California. A Michelin-starred restaurant on the ground floor called Fleur, French for flower, where the menu changed with the seasons and the bread was baked fresh every 3 hours. It was, in every sense, a dream made physical. The kind of place where tech founders marked their first billion, where film directors disappeared for a long weekend to remember what quiet felt like, where couples renewed vows in the golden hour light of the vineyard terrace, the valley spread out below them like a gift. It was not the kind of place you associated with a man in a gray hoodie sitting alone in the lobby at 9 in the evening, waiting for a door to open. But there he was. The front desk at that hour was being managed by 2 people. The first was Marcus Delwood, who was now helping a couple check in at the far end of the counter. A well-dressed pair from San Francisco who had questions about the wine cellar tour, and spoke with the comfortable ease of people who had stayed in many hotels like this one, and expected, without needing to say so, that everything would be perfect. Marcus handled them smoothly, professionally, the way he handled everything. The second person was his supervisor, a woman named Carolyn Baste. Carolyn was 41 years old, red-haired and sharp-eyed, with the particular kind of composure that comes not from being unfeeling, but from having felt everything already and made peace with most of it. She had worked in luxury hospitality for 17 years, starting as a housekeeper at a Sonoma bed and breakfast at the age of 24, working her way up through every level of the industry with the slow, determined patience of someone who understood that a career built correctly does not need to be rushed. She had seen demanding guests. She had seen impossible requests. She had seen the full, spectacular range of human behavior that luxury hotels bring out in people, the best of it and the worst of it. She had developed, over 17 years, a system for everything. Carolyn believed in systems the way some people believe in weather forecasts. Not blindly, but practically. Systems, she had learned, were what separated a good shift from a catastrophic one. Systems meant that every guest was treated with the same quality of care. Systems meant that nothing fell through the cracks. She had trained Marcus. She liked Marcus. He was disciplined and dependable, and in hospitality, those 2 things were rarer than people thought. She had not, however, been at the front desk when the man in the gray hoodie had arrived. She had been in the back office, dealing with a linen supplier issue that had been dragging on since Tuesday. She had emerged just in time to see the tail end of the exchange, the man stepping back from the counter, picking up his bag, walking to the chair by the window. She had glanced at Marcus. Marcus had given her the small, efficient nod that meant, handled, no issue. She had nodded back and returned her attention to her clipboard. She had not looked at the man in the chair again. Not yet. The third person at the front desk that night was standing at the very far end of the counter, closest to the wall, in the spot that newer staff were always given, slightly out of the main flow, close enough to observe, not yet trusted with the most complex interactions. Her name was Amara Ngozi, 22 years old, 6 weeks at the Grand Pelican. First real job after graduating from San Francisco State University, with a degree in hospitality and tourism management the previous May. She had graduated with honors, a 3.87 GPA, a senior thesis on guest experience design in boutique luxury hotels that her professor had called the best he had read in 8 years of teaching the course. She had applied to 7 hotels. The Grand Pelican had been the one she wanted most. She had been so nervous on her first day that she had arrived 45 minutes early and sat in her car in the staff parking lot, breathing slowly, telling herself she was ready. 6 weeks later, she was still learning, still watching, still figuring out the distance between what she had learned in textbooks and what the job actually felt like when you were standing in it. She was still, if she was honest with herself, a little afraid of getting things wrong. But she was also observant. That had always been her gift. Not the loudest voice in the room, not the fastest with an answer, but the one who noticed, the one who saw the details other people walked past. And she had noticed the man in the gray hoodie. She had watched him from the moment he walked through the front doors. She noticed the way he moved, unhurried, easy, like someone who had learned to take up only exactly as much space as he needed, and no more. She noticed the single duffel bag. She noticed the way he placed his hands on the counter, open, relaxed, no tension in the shoulders, no performance. She noticed that when Marcus had delivered the news about the reservation and the full hotel, the man had not gone still with the stiffness of suppressed anger. He had gone still with something else entirely, something that looked, from where Amara was standing, almost like understanding. Like he had been here before. Not in this hotel, in this moment, the moment where a door didn't open. Now she watched him sit in the velvet chair. She watched him set his bag between his feet, with the same quiet care he had set it down at the counter. She watched him look out the window at the vineyard. She watched the little girl in the red bow approach him and ask her serious question, and she watched him laugh, that real laugh, sudden and warm, and answer her with the kind of gentleness that isn't performed. That just is. Something was humming at the back of her brain. She knew that feeling. She had learned to pay attention to it. It was the feeling of a detail she had registered without yet understanding. She looked at him again, methodically, the way her hospitality professors had taught her to read a room. The shoes. Worn sneakers, yes. But she looked closer. The laces were custom, thick and flat, a specific style, the kind that were not sold in stores, the kind you ordered because you had a relationship with the brand that made them. The hands. She couldn't see any rings tonight, but there was something on his left forearm. A faint, geometric tan line, the kind that formed over years, from something worn regularly. A compression sleeve, the kind basketball players wore. The posture, even sitting, even relaxed, the man had the unconscious posture of an athlete. The way the spine held itself. The easy authority in the shoulders, not arrogance, just the quiet confidence of a body that had been trained hard for a very long time and now carried that training even in stillness. Basketball, she thought. And then the face. She let herself really look at the face for the first time. And the hum at the back of her brain became a very loud, very clear bell. Amara turned to her terminal. Her fingers moved quickly. Not frantically, she wasn't panicking yet. She was still in the information-gathering stage. She was a hospitality professional, and she was going to be sure before she did anything. She typed into the search bar, Wardell Curry NBA. The results loaded in less than a second. Wardell Stephen Curry II, point guard, Golden State Warriors, 4-time NBA champion, first unanimous MVP in NBA history, all-time leader in three-pointers made, one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. The first result had a photograph. Amara looked at the photograph. Then she looked across the lobby at the man in the velvet chair, who was now gently helping the little girl with the red bow try to retie one of her shoes, laughing softly at the child's determination to do it herself. Then she looked back at the photograph. then back at the man. Her stomach dropped the way it drops in an elevator when the cable moves faster than you expected. Oh no. She gripped the edge of the front desk. In her 6 weeks at the Grand Pelican, she had checked in dozens of guests. She had seen wealthy people arrive in every variety of extravagant entrance. She had seen a famous tech executive check in with an entourage of 8. She had seen a well-known actress sign the register in oversized sunglasses and a wide hat. She had learned that celebrity, up close, often announced itself loudly and expected the room to rearrange itself in response. This man had announced nothing. He had asked quietly for a room, been told no, and gone to sit in a chair. And he was Stephen Curry. She breathed in, breathed out. Then she remembered something. It had been her first week. Day 3, or possibly day 4. She had been so overwhelmed by the volume of new information that the days had blurred slightly at the edges. The general manager, Howard Pitts, had gathered all the new staff in the second-floor conference room for what he called an orientation session. Howard was a warm, careful man in his late 50s, the kind of manager who looked you in the eye when he spoke and meant it. He had spent 30 years in the hospitality industry and wore that experience not as authority but as genuine care. He had said many things that morning that Amara had written diligently in her notebook. But one thing he had said without any notes. He had set down his folder, looked around the room at the new faces, and spoken from somewhere that was not the management manual. "Before you make any guest feel less than completely welcomed in this building," he had said, "I want you to hold on to one thing. This resort exists because of a vision, and that vision belongs to a very private owner. He doesn't walk around with a name tag. He doesn't send announcements when he arrives. But he cares about this place in a way that is personal, genuinely, deeply personal. He cares about what it feels like to walk through those front doors. Not the decor, not the awards, the feeling. So every time you interact with a guest, every single time, ask yourself, is this the feeling he built this place for?" At the time, Amara had written it down neatly in her notebook and thought it was a beautiful thing for a manager to say. She had never looked up who the owner was. Not once in 6 weeks. She looked now. She typed, "Grand Pelican Resort, Napa Valley owner." The search results took longer this time. 4 seconds, maybe 5. When they loaded, Amara read the screen once, then read it again, slowly, making absolutely sure she was not misreading a single word. SC30 Hospitality Holdings, LLC. Registered in the state of Delaware. Founded 2022. Principal investor and majority owner, Wardell Stephen Curry II. The lobby was quiet. The chandelier above cast warm amber light across the limestone floor. The soft music played, from wherever it always played from. The white flowers in their tall glass vases stood perfectly still. Across the room, the little girl's mother, a kind-faced woman named Sandra Velez, visiting from Sacramento for her wedding anniversary, had finally reached the velvet chair, slightly flushed and apologetic, to collect her daughter. "I'm so sorry," Sandra was saying. "She just does this. She attaches herself to strangers. I don't know where she gets it." The man was laughing again, waving a hand gently. "She's perfect," he said warmly. "Genuinely. Don't apologize." Sandra looked at him. The easy laugh, the kind eyes, the complete absence of irritation at having a strange child fall asleep against his arm. And she smiled the way you smile at someone who has unexpectedly restored your faith in something. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being so kind." "Thank her," he said, nodding at the little girl. "She asked better questions than most people I meet." Sandra laughed, scooped up her daughter, and walked back across the lobby. The man watched them go. Then he looked back out the window. The fog had thickened now, rolling in heavy and white across the vineyard rows, swallowing the base of the hills entirely. The clock on the lobby wall read 9:09 p.m. He had been sitting in that chair for 41 minutes. Amara Ngozi stared at her screen. Her mind was moving fast, but not chaotically. She was running through the situation the way her thesis professor had taught her to run through a service failure. Identify, understand, decide, act. 4 steps. Clean and clear. She had identified. She understood. Now she had to decide. She could get Carolyn. Right now. Walk to the back of the desk and say quietly, "I think you need to see something." Let the hierarchy take over. Let the system handle it the way systems were designed to. Or, she could do something else. She thought about what Howard Pitts had said in that first-week orientation. Is this the feeling he built this place for? She looked at the man in the velvet chair. He had been sitting in the lobby of a hotel he owned for 41 minutes. He had been turned away from a room in his own building. He had not said a word about it. He had helped a little girl tie her shoe. He had laughed at her questions. He had watched the fog come in over his vineyard. He was waiting, not because he had no choice, because that was who he was. Is this the feeling he built this place for? Amara straightened up. She stepped out from behind the far end of the front desk. She walked across the lobby. Her footsteps were quiet on the limestone. Her heart was loud in her chest. The loud, specific beat of someone who has made a decision and is now walking toward it before they can change their mind. She stopped 3 feet from the velvet chair. The man looked up at her. That quiet, easy face. The one that made you feel, immediately, that whatever you were about to say had already been forgiven. "Mr. Curry," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He looked at her for a moment. His expression did not change dramatically. There was no flash of being caught, no shift into celebrity mode. He just looked at her, calm and present. "How'd you figure it out?" he asked. She exhaled through her nose. "Google." He smiled, small and genuine. "How long have you worked here?" 6 weeks. He nodded slowly. The way you nod when a small piece of information answers a much larger question that you hadn't quite formed yet. "What's your name?" "Amara," she said. "Amara Ngozi." He repeated it. "Amara." Quietly, carefully. The way people say a name when they are making sure it moves from short-term to permanent. "What are you going to do?" And there it was. Not "what should I do?" The question of a man waiting for someone else to solve his problem. But "what are you going to do?" The question of someone who had already decided not to solve it himself, and was now watching to see what she was made of. Amara thought for exactly 2 seconds. "I'd like to handle it myself," she said. "If that's okay with you." He studied her face. Not testing her, reading her. The way you read someone when you want to know not just what they're saying, but what they mean underneath it. Then he said 2 words. "Then, handle it." Amara walked back to the front desk. Her hands were still shaking. A small, fine tremor that she was fairly sure nobody could see. But her mind was clear. Cleaner than it had been all evening. She pulled up the reservation system. She found the booking under Wardell. Check-in October 13th. Monarch Suite. All details correct. She flagged it for a same-day date correction. The system prompted her, "Supervisor approval required." She could not do this alone. She would have to tell Carolyn. She looked at the back office door. Telling Carolyn meant explaining that the hotel had turned away its own owner. That he had been sitting in the lobby for going on 45 minutes. That 2 front desk staff, one of them her, had been 10 feet away for most of that time, and only one of them had noticed. She knocked on the door. "Carolyn?" Her voice was steady. "I need to show you something." There was a pause. Then the sound of a chair. Then the door opened, and Carolyn looked at her with the particular expression of someone interrupted mid-task. Not annoyed exactly, but requiring a good reason. Something in Amara's face provided it. Carolyn let the door swing wider. "What is it?" Amara said simply, "You need to see the screen." They walked to the terminal together. Carolyn read what was on it. The search results, the ownership record, the name. There was a long silence. The kind of silence that has weight and texture. The kind that presses against your ears. Then Carolyn looked up from the screen. Slowly. She looked across the lobby, across the limestone floor, past the chandelier light, past the tall glass vases of white flowers, to the man in the velvet chair by the window. He was looking out at the fog, completely still, completely unbothered. A man at rest in a room he had built for people to feel at rest in. "He hasn't said anything?" Carolyn said. Her voice had dropped to something very quiet. "Nothing," Amara said. "He just waited." Another silence. Carolyn pressed her fingertips against her lips. She had 17 years in this industry. She had handled things that most people in this job never encountered. She had a system for everything. She did not have a system for this. "Get Howard," she said finally. "It's past 9, Amara said. "I know what time it is." Carolyn was already moving. "Get Howard Pitts on the phone right now." At the far end of the front desk, Marcus Delwood had finished checking in the couple from San Francisco. He looked up. He glanced across the lobby. The man in the gray hoodie was still in the chair. Marcus frowned. A small, automatic frown. "Is that guy still here?" he said to no one in particular. He should really try somewhere down the road. The Westin might have availability. Amara did not answer. She was already dialing Howard Pitts. She looked at Marcus, this good, hard-working, rule-following young man who had done everything correctly tonight and understood almost none of what was about to happen to him. And she thought, in about 12 minutes, Marcus Delwood is going to learn something that no hospitality program, no training manual, and no amount of being technically correct can ever teach you. She let the phone ring. Howard Pitts picked up on the third ring. "Howard." Amara kept her voice low and even. "I'm sorry to call this late. I need to tell you something about a guest." There was a small pause on the other end. The kind of pause that happens when a person shifts from the relaxed rhythm of an evening at home into the alert stillness of someone whose job has just followed them there. "Go ahead," Howard said. Amara told him. Not dramatically, not in a rush. She laid it out the way she had been taught to present a service failure, clearly, in order, without editorializing. Guest arrived. Reservation date discrepancy. Room unavailable. Guest was turned away at the front desk. Guest is currently seated in the lobby. Then she said the last part. The guest is Wardell Stephen Curry II, Howard. He's been sitting in the lobby for 47 minutes. The silence that followed was different from the pause before it. The first pause had been the silence of attention. This one was the silence of a man processing something that his 30 years in the hospitality industry had not specifically prepared him for. "Is he upset?" Howard said finally. "No," Amara said. "That's the thing. He's completely calm. He hasn't asked for anything. He hasn't called anyone. He's just sitting there." Another silence. Shorter this time. "Don't make a scene," Howard said. "Don't hover. Make sure he has water. I'm on my way." The call ended. Amara lowered the phone. She looked at Carolyn, who had been standing close enough to hear most of it. Carolyn's face had the particular expression of someone doing very rapid, very private calculations, assessing the situation, measuring the damage, trying to find the solid ground in a floor that had shifted unexpectedly beneath her. "He said don't make a scene," Amara told her. "I heard him," Carolyn said quietly. She straightened her jacket, smoothed her hair back once with one hand, a small, composed gesture. Then she looked at Amara directly. "You did the right thing catching this," she said. It cost Carolyn something to say it, not because she was unkind, but because Carolyn Baste was a woman who had built her career on being the one who caught things. Having a 6-week employee see what she had missed was not a comfortable feeling, but she said it anyway, because it was true. "Thank you," Amara said. Carolyn nodded once, then turned back to the desk. Amara filled a glass of still water from the hospitality station behind the counter. She carried it across the lobby on a small silver tray, unhurried, natural, the way you carry water to a guest who has been waiting, not the way you approach a man you have just discovered owns the building you are standing in. She set it on the side table next to his chair. "Still water, Mr. Curry. Can I get you anything else while you wait?" He looked at the glass, then at her. "That's perfect," he said. "Thank you, Amara." The sound of her name, said simply, easily, like he had known it for years, did something unexpected to her composure. She had been holding herself together with the focused calm of someone very deliberately not falling apart, and hearing her name in that easy, human way made the focused calm wobble for just a second. She kept her face steady. "Howard Pitts is on his way," she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. The recognition of someone watching a decision be carried through to its conclusion. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she said. She walked back to the desk. The lobby at 9:30 on a Thursday evening in October had the particular quiet of a place settling into itself. Most guests had finished dinner. The restaurant had dimmed its lights for the late evening service. The rooftop pool was closed. The wine cellar tour had ended hours ago. The corridors upstairs were still and carpeted and hushed. Down here, in the warm amber of the lobby light, only a few people moved. Sandra Velez's daughter, the little girl with the red bow, had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder as they waited for the elevator. The well-dressed couple from San Francisco had gone up to their room. A pair of older gentlemen in blazers moved slowly through the lobby toward the bar, deep in the kind of conversation that men have when they have known each other for 40 years and no longer need to explain the context. And in the velvet chair by the window, the one that looked out over the fog-covered vineyard, the one near the lamp that cast the warmest light in the room, a man in a gray hoodie sat quietly with a glass of water and the particular stillness of someone who was, in some way that was hard to define, exactly where he was supposed to be. Marcus Delwood watched him from behind the front desk. He had been watching him for the past several minutes, with a growing unease that he couldn't quite name. He was not a man who ignored his instincts. In 8 months at the Grand Pelican he had developed, without fully realizing it, a hospitality worker's sensitivity to the texture of a room. And the texture of this room had changed. He could feel it in the way Carolyn was moving, too precisely, too quietly. He could feel it in the way Amara had carried that water across the lobby, too carefully, like the tray held something more fragile than a glass of water. He could feel it in the way the back office phone had rung, and Carolyn had picked it up and turned slightly away from him. Something was happening. He just didn't know what yet. He looked at the man in the chair again. Gray hoodie, worn sneakers, single duffel bag, glass of still water. Marcus ran back through the interaction at the desk. Every word, every decision. He had checked the system. He had found the reservation. The check-in date was tomorrow. The hotel was at capacity. The policy was clear. He had followed every step correctly. He had done everything right. So why did the back of his neck feel like this? He looked at Amara. She was facing her terminal, but she wasn't really looking at it. She was thinking about something. He could tell by the set of her shoulders, that inward, absorbed stillness. "Hey," he said quietly, "what's going on?" She looked at him, and for a moment he saw something in her face. Not pity, not superiority, not the smug expression of someone who knows something you don't. What he saw was something closer to the careful look of someone deciding how much to say and in what order. "Howard's coming in," she said. Marcus blinked. "Howard Pitts? Tonight?" "Yes. Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because something needs to be handled." "What something?" "I handled the situation. The guest doesn't have a valid reservation for tonight. I followed protocol exactly." "Marcus." Her voice was gentle. Genuinely gentle. The way you are gentle with someone when you know what's coming and wish, a little, that you could soften it. I know you did. Something about the way she said that stopped him. Not you did fine, or you were right. Just, I know you did. He looked back at the man in the chair. Who is he? Marcus said. Amara was quiet for a second. Howard will explain when he gets here, she said. But Marcus, before he does, I want you to think about something. He looked at her. Think about what it felt like, she said carefully. When you looked at that guest and made your decision, what did you see first? The reservation problem, or the person? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. It was not an accusation. It was a question. A real one, asked without malice, in the tone of someone who understood that the answer mattered more than the argument. He looked back at the velvet chair. The man was looking out the window now. The fog had come all the way in. There was no vineyard visible anymore, just white, soft, formless fog pressing gently against the glass. And the man was watching it with the relaxed attention of someone watching something beautiful. Marcus felt the first cold drop of understanding begin its slow fall through the center of his chest. He didn't know the full story yet, but the drop was falling. Howard Pitts arrived at 10:08 p.m. He came through the front doors in a dark overcoat, slightly damp at the shoulders from the October rain that had started somewhere around Yountville on the drive up. He still had his reading glasses on, the ones he wore at home in the evenings for books and paperwork. And it was clear from the way he reached up to touch them in the doorway that he had only just realized they were there. He was breathing slightly harder than normal. Not from running, from urgency contained in a body that was trying very deliberately to move at a normal pace. Amara saw him first. She gave him the smallest nod, a directional nod, toward the velvet chair by the window. Howard looked. 30 years of hospitality. Every variety of difficult situation. A career built on the steady management of other people's emergencies. He stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds, which, for Howard Pitts, was a long time to stand still. Then he walked across the lobby. He did not stop at the front desk. He did not ask Carolyn for a briefing. He did not straighten his tie, or review his notes, or prepare a speech. He walked directly to the velvet chair, and he stood before the man in the gray hoodie, and for the first time in 30 years, he had no script at all. Steph looked up. "Mr. Curry," Howard said. His voice was quiet and direct, the way voices get when a person strips everything unnecessary away. "I am so deeply sorry." Steph looked at him for a moment, reading him the same way he had read Amara, the same way he seemed to read everyone, with that patient, present attention that had nothing performative in it. Then he stood up, not sharply, not with the movement of a man making a point. Just the natural rising of someone who respects the person standing in front of them and wants to meet them at eye level. He extended his hand. Howard shook it. "Howard," Steph said, "sit down for a second." "Sir, we should absolutely get you up to the Monarch Suite. It's being prepared right now, and I want to make sure we—" "Howard," the name again, easy and firm all at once. "Sit down." Howard sat. From across the lobby, Amara watched. She could not hear what was being said. The distance was too great, the lobby music too present, the two voices too low and private. What she could see was this: Howard Pitts, who had walked in carrying the rigid posture of a man bracing for something terrible, slowly, over the course of several minutes, let his shoulders come down. Not all at once. Gradually. The way tension leaves a body when it realizes it has been met with something unexpected. She saw him nod. 3 times, then 4. She saw him lean forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of someone fully present, fully engaged, not managing a situation, but participating in a conversation. She saw him press his hand over his eyes once, just briefly, just for a moment. The way people do when something catches them in a feeling they weren't prepared for, and they need a second to let the feeling pass through without being seen. She saw Steph lean forward and say something. She saw Howard laugh. A real laugh. The surprised, unguarded kind that comes when something genuinely funny arrives in the middle of something genuinely serious and reminds you that both can exist at once. The laugh lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then they were talking again, low and steady. Amara looked away. Some conversations deserve their privacy even when you're standing in the same room. She straightened the items on the front desk. She refilled the pen holder. She checked the printer paper. She did the small, ordinary tasks of a person who is very consciously giving two people space. At the far end of the desk, Marcus was still. He had not moved much in the past 10 minutes. He had been watching Howard's arrival with the frozen attention of someone watching a slow-motion thing they could not stop. When Howard had walked past the desk without stopping, without the briefing, without the review, straight to the chair, Marcus had understood for the first time that the situation was not the size he had assumed it was. Now he watched the conversation by the window. He watched Howard's shoulders come down. He watched the laugh. And the cold drop that had started falling in the center of his chest when Amara had asked her question had now completed its fall and landed in a quiet pool at the bottom of him, spreading outward. He looked at Amara. "Tell me," he said. Not a demand, a request. The quiet, humbled request of someone who already knows that what they're about to hear is going to cost them something. She reached to the printer beside her terminal. A single page. She held it out. He took it. He read the first line. SC30, Hospitality Holdings, LLC. Principal investor and majority owner. Wardell Stephen Curry II. He read it again. He looked up at the man in the velvet chair, the man in the worn gray hoodie, the man with the single duffel bag, the man he had turned away from the front desk of his own hotel at 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening while following every rule correctly and seeing almost nothing at all. Marcus sat down, not gracefully. He simply ran out of the ability to stand, and the chair behind the desk caught him. His face moved through several expressions: understanding, recognition, a sharp internal wince, something that looked very close to shame, not the hot, defensive shame of someone caught doing something bad, but the slower, more honest shame of someone confronting the gap between who they thought they were and who they had actually been in a particular moment. "Oh no," he whispered. He said it like a man who had just seen the whole picture for the first time and understood every part of it. "Oh yes," Amara said, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just quietly, the way you confirm something true when the other person has finally arrived at it on their own. Across the lobby, the conversation in the velvet chair was winding down. Howard Pitts was sitting straighter now, not the rigid straight of tension, but the open straight of someone who had been, in the truest sense of the word, realigned. He looked like a man who had walked into a conversation expecting to absorb a blow and had instead been handed something he didn't have words for yet. He would find words for it later. At his kitchen table the next morning, with his wife Della's coffee going cold between them, because neither of them moved to drink it. But that was tomorrow. Right now, he stood when Steph stood, and shook his hand again, and said something quietly to which Steph nodded, and then Howard moved back across the lobby with the careful walk of a man carrying something valuable and invisible. He stopped at the front desk. He looked at Marcus first. Marcus met his eyes, did not look away, did not offer excuses or explanations, just met his manager's eyes with the direct, uncomfortable honesty of someone who understood that this was the correct thing to do, even though it was not the easy thing. Howard looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "We'll talk tomorrow." "Come in early." Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir." Howard turned to Amara. His expression shifted. Not dramatically, but in the way a face shifts when it moves from one kind of feeling to another. From the heavy, complicated feeling of accountability to something quieter and different. "You made the call," he said. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said simply. He turned toward the back office to call the Monarch Suite preparation team. Then he stopped, turned back once more. "Amara," he said, "what made you look?" She thought about it for a moment. The honest answer. "He wasn't angry," she said. "Someone who should have been angry wasn't." That felt important. Howard Pitts looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said softly. "It was." He went through the back office door. Amara stood at the front desk. The lobby was quiet around her, the chandelier warm above her, the fog thick and white against the windows. She thought about what Steph had said to her when she'd walked across the lobby toward him, when her heart was loud and her hands were shaking, and she still wasn't sure if she was allowed to do what she was about to do. "What are you going to do?" And she had said, "I'd like to handle it myself." And he had said, "Then handle it." 2 words. She had spent 6 weeks at the Grand Pelican being careful, being correct, being the new employee who stayed in her lane and followed the process, and did not speak up unless spoken to. She had thought that was what being professional looked like. She understood now that it was only half of it. The other half was this: the moment when you see the person in the chair, and you cross the room, and you say the name. That was the job too. Maybe, she thought, that was the most important part of the job. She looked out the window at the fog. She thought about where she wanted to be in 5 years, 10 years, the questions her professors had asked, the plans she had written in her thesis, the version of herself she had imagined when she'd sat in her car in the staff parking lot on her first morning and breathed slowly and told herself she was ready. She was beginning to understand what ready actually felt like. It didn't feel like certainty. It felt like crossing the room anyway. Upstairs, in the Monarch Suite on the 5th floor, a man in a gray hoodie set his duffel bag on the bench at the foot of a very good bed. He stood at the window. Below him, the vineyard was completely invisible now, swallowed whole by the fog. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a small notebook. He sat at the desk by the window, opened the notebook to a clean page, and wrote something. He looked at what he had written. Then he tore the page out carefully, folded it once, and set it on the desk beside his phone. He would give it to Howard in the morning. But there was something else he needed to do first. He picked up his phone. He opened his email. He typed a name into the search bar. A name he had asked Howard for during their conversation in the lobby. A name attached to a story Howard had told him. A story about a young woman who had applied to the best hospitality school in the world, been waitlisted, and chosen the job she could afford over the dream she couldn't. Steph read what came back on his screen. He sat with it for a moment. Then he began to type. He did not type fast. He was not the kind of person who typed fast when the words mattered. He had learned that early, not from anyone who sat him down and taught it to him, but from watching his father, Del Curry, who had spent 20 years in the NBA as a player, and understood better than most that the moments worth something were the ones you slowed down for. Del Curry had retired from professional basketball in 2002, after 16 seasons, with the quiet dignity of a man who had never needed the spotlight to know his own worth. He had raised his sons in Charlotte, North Carolina, Steph and his younger brother Seth, who would also go on to play in the NBA, in a household where the loudest thing was not ambition but character. "The room will always tell you who you are," Del had said once, during a quiet dinner in Charlotte when Steph was maybe 15. "Not the room you're standing in, the room you leave behind. What does it feel like in there after you've gone?" Steph had not fully understood it at 15. He understood it completely now. He typed carefully, deliberately. The way you write something when you know it will matter to the person who reads it, and you want every word to carry its full weight, and nothing extra. When he was done, he read it back once. Then he pressed send. He set his phone face down on the desk. He looked out at the fog. Somewhere below him, in the lobby, a 22-year-old woman named Amara Ngozi was finishing her shift. She did not know what had just been sent. She would not know tonight. She would not know tomorrow morning, or the day after that. She would find out the way most important things are found out. Not all at once, but in pieces, each one arriving just when she was ready for it. He hoped she was ready. He thought she was. Howard Pitts had driven 40 minutes through October rain to get to the Grand Pelican that night. He had not complained about the rain. He had not complained about the time. He had not, in the car, rehearsed what he was going to say, because every version he tried felt wrong before it reached the end of itself, and he had learned enough in 30 years to know that some moments don't benefit from rehearsal. You just had to show up and be honest. So he had driven through the dark rain of the Napa Valley and thought about 30 years. He thought about the Holiday Inn in Fresno, where he had started, a front desk clerk at 22, making $11 an hour, learning the industry from the ground up, the way you learn anything worth knowing, by doing it badly first, and paying attention to why. He thought about the decade he had spent working his way through increasingly fine properties, a Marriott in Sacramento, a boutique hotel in San Francisco's Hayes Valley, a resort in Carmel by the Sea that had taught him what genuine luxury felt like, as distinct from performed luxury. He thought about the moment, 12 years ago, when he had realized the difference between the two. Genuine luxury was when a guest felt, without being able to say exactly why, that someone in the building actually cared whether they were all right. Performed luxury was when everything looked correct and nothing felt true. He had spent the second half of his career trying to build the first kind, the Grand Pelican. When the opportunity had come to manage it in 2019, had felt like the place where everything he had learned was finally going to be used for something complete. He had been right about that. What he had not known, in 2019, was who had ultimately purchased it. He had found out in the fall of 2022, when SC30 Hospitality Holdings LLC had finalized the acquisition. He had received a call from a quiet, professional representative of the company, who explained the ownership structure and outlined an operating agreement that gave Howard full management authority over the resort's day-to-day operations. The representative had said at the end of the call, "The owner values privacy, he values quality, and he values people being treated the way he would want to be treated if no one knew who he was." Howard had written that down. He had, in fact, framed it. It was in his office, on the wall behind his desk, in plain black text on a white card. Treat people the way he would want to be treated, if no one knew who he was. He looked at it every morning. Tonight, he had failed it. Not through malice, not through negligence. Through the accumulated small assumptions that build up in any well-run operation. The assumption that a system working correctly is the same as a place working correctly. The assumption that a staff following protocol is the same as a staff seeing people. He had parked his car in the rain and walked through the front doors carrying all of that. And then he had sat down in a velvet chair next to a man in a gray hoodie, and the man had said, "Sit down," and everything Howard had prepared to carry had been, gently and completely, taken from him. What happened in those 20 minutes in the velvet chair was not captured anywhere. No recording, no notes, no press release or social media post or leaked account. The only people who know what was said are the two men who said it, and one young woman who watched from a respectful distance and could read the body language but not the words. But Howard Pitts told his wife Della the following morning, at their kitchen table in the house they had owned for 14 years on a quiet street in Napa, with the rain from the previous night still dripping from the roof gutters and both their coffees going slowly cold. He told her everything, and this is what he said. He didn't open with the mistake. He didn't bring up the lobby, or the reservation, or Marcus, or any of it. He just asked me how long I'd been at the Grand Pelican. I said 5 years. He said, "What do you love most about it?" And Della, I wasn't ready for that question. Nobody asks you that question. You manage a property, You handle the operations. You deal with the staff reviews and the supplier contracts and the occupancy rates. Nobody sits you down and asks what you love most about it. I told him. I said, the mornings. The early mornings before the guests are up, when the light is coming over the vineyard and the kitchen is just starting, and the whole building is quiet, and it feels like the day hasn't made any mistakes yet. I told him I walk the lobby every morning at 6:30, and it's the best part of my job. He listened to all of that, really listened, not waiting for his turn, but actually in it with me. Then he said, that's why I bought it. I asked him what he meant. He said, I've been in a lot of buildings, hotels, arenas, restaurants, boardrooms. I've been in buildings that were technically perfect and felt like nothing. And I've been in places that were simple and felt like everything. The Grand Pelican felt like everything the first time I walked through it. I bought it because I wanted to protect that feeling. Not own it, protect it. I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded. Then he talked about the staff. He asked me about the young woman who figured it out, how long she'd been there, where she came from, what she was like. I told him about Amara, 6 weeks in, hospitality degree from SF State, sharp as anyone I'd seen come through in years. He listened to everything. Then he asked about Marcus. And Della, this is the part. He didn't ask about Marcus, the way someone asks when they're deciding whether to fire someone. He asked the way you ask about someone you're trying to understand. He said, tell me about him. Not what he did tonight. Tell me about him. So I told him. Vallejo. Put himself through school. 8 months at the property. Solid in every review. A young man who believed in doing things right. Steph nodded for a long time after that. Then he said something I'm going to hear for the rest of my life. He said, a man who follows the rules isn't the problem. A man who follows the rules without ever looking at the person in front of him. That's what we need to fix. And that's not on Marcus. That's on all of us. That's on the culture of the building. If the culture of a building teaches people to see reservations instead of guests, that's a leadership conversation, not a discipline conversation. I had to put my hand over my eyes for a second, because he was right. He was absolutely right. And the thing that got me, the thing I couldn't quite hold on to, was that he was sitting in the lobby of his own hotel for 47 minutes, and his first instinct was not to ask what went wrong, but to ask what we could build differently. I laughed at one point. He said something about how the best lessons always cost you some dignity, and he'd had plenty of dignity taken from him over the years. He mentioned the 2016 finals, losing to Cleveland, 4-3, and said losing that series in front of the entire world was the most educational thing that ever happened to him. I laughed because what else do you do when a 4-time champion tells you losing is his best teacher? Then he said, Howard, I bought this place because I believed in what it could feel like. Not the chandeliers, not the Michelin star, not the vineyard view. The feeling of walking through that door and knowing someone in there is actually glad you came. He stood up, he shook my hand, and then he asked me one thing. He asked if there was anything in the kitchen. Della Pitts listened to all of it without interrupting. When Howard finished, she sat with it for a moment, the way she sat with things that mattered, letting them settle fully before she responded. Then she said, he asked for food. He asked for food, Howard confirmed. After all of that, she said, after sitting in the lobby for almost an hour, after the conversation, he asked for food. He said he hadn't eaten since noon. Della looked at her husband for a long moment. Then she laughed. The same kind of laugh Howard had laughed in the velvet chair. The surprised, free kind. I like him, she said. Yeah, Howard said. Me too. The Grand Pelican's kitchen officially closed at 10 p.m. The last orders were taken at 9:45. The line was broken down by 9:55. By 10 o'clock, Chef René Dorval was reviewing the following day's prep list and sending his crew home with the particular satisfaction of a man who had run a good service and knew it. René was 44 years old, Haitian-American, born in Miami and raised partly in Port-au-Prince until his family returned to Florida when he was 12. He had grown up in a household where food was not decoration. It was the language the family used for everything important. Celebrations, grief, apology, love. His grandmother had cooked for 12 people every Sunday, with the focused joy of someone conducting a ceremony. And René had watched her do it from a stool beside the stove for the first 11 years of his life. He had trained at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York, graduating in 2001, and spent the next 20 years working his way through kitchens of increasing ambition and decreasing forgiveness. 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, 2 in New York, 1 in Chicago. He had earned a star of his own at Fleur in 2022, the first year of eligibility after the restaurant's opening, which had been written about in food publications across the country. He did not cook to be written about. He cooked because the act of feeding someone well was, to him, one of the most direct expressions of care available to a human being. You took something raw and you transformed it with your hands and your knowledge and your attention, and you sent it out to a person you would likely never meet, and if you did it right, if you did it with genuine focus, that person would feel, for the duration of the meal, that someone had thought specifically about them. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. When Howard called the kitchen at 10:11 p.m., René was alone at the prep counter with his clipboard. "René," Howard said, "I need a late plate for a VIP guest. Whatever you think is right." "How late did they arrive?" René asked. "Not who is it, how late?" Because the question that mattered was not the person's title, but the state of their hunger, and how long they had been waiting for someone to address it. "Almost 2 hours ago," Howard said. A pause. "Give me 20 minutes, René said. He set down his clipboard. He went to the walk-in. He chose the short rib. It had been braising since 4 o'clock that afternoon. 6 hours in a Dutch oven with red wine, beef stock, fresh thyme, and 2 bay leaves from the resort's kitchen garden. It was, at this point in its cooking, the kind of food that rewarded patience. Food that could not be rushed, that had no shortcut, that tasted, if you were paying attention, like time itself had been an ingredient. He plated it over truffle polenta, smooth and golden, made with stone-ground corn and finished with a shaving of black truffle from a knob he had been preserving in arborio rice since Tuesday. He added a small arrangement of roasted root vegetables. He cut 2 thick slices of the sourdough that the kitchen baked every morning at 5 a.m. and again at 2 p.m. Bread that had a crust that shattered and an inside that was dense and warm and slightly sour in the way that made you want to eat the entire loaf. He added a pot of honey butter made with local wildflower honey from a farm in Carneros, 8 miles south. He looked at the plate. He adjusted one thing, a small thing, a detail nobody would notice or name, but that he noticed because it was his plate, and his name was on it, even when his name wasn't on it. Then he called for Tommy Osei. Tommy was 19 years old. He had started at the Grand Pelican 4 weeks earlier. His first job in hospitality. His first real job of any kind, beyond the summer landscaping work he had done through high school in Calistoga, the small town at the north end of the Napa Valley, where he had grown up. He was tall and slightly gangly in the way of 19-year-olds who have not quite finished growing into themselves. With an easy smile and the slightly overwhelmed eyes of someone absorbing a large amount of new information every single day. He loved the job already. He loved the order of it. The way a good service had a rhythm, like a song with a structure you learned and then stopped thinking about because it was in your body. He loved the guests, not in a servile way, but in the way of someone genuinely curious about the range of human beings that moved through a place like this. He loved Chef René, who was exacting and occasionally terrifying, but who had told Tommy on his first day, "If you pay attention in this kitchen, you will understand people better than any classroom will ever teach you. Food is not the point. People are the point. Food is just how we get there." Tommy had written that down in the Notes app on his phone. He still had it. When Renee called him to the pass at 10:19 and handed him the tray, the short rib, the polenta, the bread, the wine, he said one thing: "Lobby. Velvet chair by the window. Said it gently. And tell him this." He told Tommy what to say. Tommy repeated it back. Renee nodded once. "Go." Tommy carried the tray across the empty restaurant, through the corridor, and into the lobby. He was careful with the tray, the way you are careful when you understand that the thing you are carrying matters. Not because anyone told you it did, but because the weight of the preparation behind it has transferred, somehow, through the porcelain and the silver and the linen, into your hands. The lobby was quiet and warm. He crossed the limestone floor. The man in the velvet chair looked up when Tommy approached. He had his phone in his hand but was not looking at it. He was looking at the fog against the window, the way you look at weather when you're thinking about something else entirely. Tommy set the tray on the side table with the careful precision of someone who had practiced this exact motion many times and wanted to do it right tonight specifically. He straightened up. He said what Renee had told him to say. "Compliments of Chef Renee, sir. He wants you to know the short rib has been cooking since 4 o'clock this afternoon. 6 hours. He says it deserves at least 20 minutes of your attention." The man looked at the plate. He looked at the glass of wine, deep garnet in the lamplight, the 2019 Schaefer Hillside Select, from a vineyard on the eastern hillside of the valley that was considered one of Napa's finest. A wine that wine critics had described as tasting like the valley itself had been concentrated into a glass. Then he looked up at Tommy. Tommy met his eyes and felt something, standing in that lobby at 10:20 p.m., that he would spend a long time afterward trying to describe accurately. It wasn't recognition. He didn't know yet who the man was. It wasn't awe. It was something simpler and harder to name. The feeling of being in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, and knowing it, and feeling the knowing settle in your chest like something that belonged there. "Tell Chef Renee," the man said, "that I'll give it the full 20. Tommy nodded, turned, walked back through the lobby toward the kitchen. He reported it to Renee, word for word. Renee untied his apron. He set it on the counter. He sat down on the kitchen stool, the tall one he used when he was tasting, thinking, or finishing. He sat there in the quiet kitchen and did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, to no one in particular, to the kitchen itself, "Good." Just that. Good. Steph ate slowly. He cut the short rib with the side of his fork. It gave without resistance, the way meat does when time has been genuinely patient with it. He took the first bite and sat with it for a moment, before taking the second. He tore a piece of the sourdough and dragged it through the polenta. He sipped the wine, once, then again, and looked out at the fog-covered vineyard that was his and that he couldn't see tonight, and felt, in the way that good food in a quiet room produces, a loosening of something that had been held carefully all day. He thought about his father. He thought about 2009, the year the NBA draft had come, and the Charlotte Bobcats had sat at number 12 and looked at the point guard from Davidson College, who had lit up the NCAA tournament that March, taking his 10-seed Davidson team all the way to the Elite Eight and stunning the country in the process, and decided he wasn't quite what they needed. The Golden State Warriors had taken him at number 7. Golden State in 2009 was not the Golden State of later years. They had won 29 games that season. They were rebuilding, uncertain, easy to overlook. Everyone had an opinion about whether the pick was right. Del Curry had none. He had called his son the night of the draft and said, "Son, the rooms that were hardest to get into were always the ones you were meant to be in. Remember that." Steph had remembered it through 4 championships. through the unanimous MVP, through the three-point records and the finals victories, and the years of being told, early, that he was too small, too slight, not athletic enough for the level he was aiming for. He remembered it now, sitting in the lobby of a hotel he had bought, because it felt like everything, eating a plate of short rib that a chef he had never met had cooked with 6 hours of patience, in a room he had been turned away from 2 hours ago, the room that was hardest to get into. He was meant to be in it. He finished the short rib. Renee was right about the 20 minutes. He finished the wine. He set the napkin on the tray. He looked out the window one more time. The fog was as thick as it had been all evening, formless and white and still, pressing softly against the glass, as if it wanted in. He thought about Amara. He thought about the way she had walked across the lobby toward him, the careful, deliberate walk of someone who had made a decision and was honoring it before they could change their mind. He thought about the shake in her voice that she had controlled, and the steadiness in her eyes that she had not needed to control, because it was simply there, underneath everything, native to her. He thought about what Howard had told him. Cornell University's School of Hotel Administration, waitlisted, financial constraints, a dream deferred in the practical direction of a dream adjacent. He had asked Howard for everything he knew. Howard had told him. And upstairs, before coming down for dinner, Steph had done what he always did when someone's story landed in him with that particular weight. He had started to do something about it. He left the tray neatly arranged on the side table. He stood. He picked up his duffel bag, still beside the chair where he had set it 2 hours ago, faithful and small and patient. He walked to the elevator. He pressed 5. The doors closed. The lobby was quiet behind him. The velvet chair sat empty in the lamplight, beside the window, beside the fog-covered vineyard, in the warm amber of a building that felt, when you stood in it alone at 10:40 p.m. on a Thursday in October, exactly the way it was supposed to feel. Like someone had built it carefully. Like someone in there was actually glad you came. In the kitchen, Tommy Osei was finishing the end-of-service cleanup. He was wiping down the pass counter when something occurred to him. He pulled out his phone. He searched the name. The results came back. Tommy stood very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then he set his phone down on the counter, picked up his cloth, and went back to wiping. But his hands had changed. They were steadier than before. Like someone who has just understood, for the first time, what kind of work they are actually doing. He finished the cleanup in silence. The other kitchen staff had already gone. The sous chef, the prep cook, the dishwasher who always left with headphones in, and a quiet nod to whoever was still there. The kitchen was empty now except for Tommy and the low hum of the refrigeration units and the particular stillness that commercial kitchens have after service, when all the heat and noise and urgency of the evening has passed through and left the room clean and honest behind it. Tommy wiped the counter in long, even strokes. He thought about what he had just read. He thought about the plate he had carried across the lobby, the short rib on the polenta, the sourdough, the wine. He thought about the way he had set the tray down, carefully, because the weight of what was behind it had transferred into his hands. He thought about the man looking up at him and saying, "I'll give it the full 20. He had not known, when he carried that tray, that he was bringing dinner to one of the greatest basketball players who had ever lived. He had not known he was serving the owner of the building. He had known only that Chef René had cooked something with 6 hours of patience and wanted it carried correctly to a person who had been waiting. And that, Tommy was now understanding, was the entire point. Not the who. The what. The act of feeding someone well, with care, at the end of a long evening, when the kitchen had already closed, and the easy thing would have been to say there was nothing left. There was always something left, when the people doing the work understood what the work actually was. He folded his cloth neatly over the edge of the sink. He turned off the pass lights. He walked out of the kitchen into the service corridor, then through the side door into the cool October night. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cold and smelling of wet earth and oak. And he stood for a moment in the staff parking lot, looking up at the building. One window on the 5th floor had its light on. Just one. He looked at it for a moment. Then he got in his car and drove home to Calistoga, 14 miles north, on a road he had driven 100 times, that felt tonight like a different road entirely. Friday, October 13th, 2023, arrived in Napa Valley, the way October mornings arrive there, slowly, and with extraordinary beauty. The fog that had pressed against the Grand Pelican's windows all night began to lift just before 6 a.m., pulling back from the vineyard in long, slow ribbons, revealing the rows of vines beneath, golden and amber in the early light, the leaves turning in the way that only happens in that narrow window between harvest and winter, when the valley looks more like a painting of itself than the real thing. Howard Pitts walked the lobby at 6:30, the way he walked it every morning. He was thinking about what he had told Della at the kitchen table. He was thinking about the framed card behind his desk. Treat people the way he would want to be treated if no one knew who he was. And about how last night had measured the distance between that principle written on a card and that principle lived in a building. The distance had been larger than he wanted it to be. He walked the length of the lobby slowly. He looked at the velvet chair by the window, the one that sat empty now in the early morning light, with a small indentation in the cushion still visible from the evening before, the side table beside it cleared and cleaned by the overnight staff. He stood in front of it for a moment. He thought about a man sitting in that chair for 47 minutes, not angry, not performing patience for an audience, just genuinely, quietly present, the way people are present when they have made peace with the fact that the world does not always move at the pace you need it to, and that making peace with that is not weakness, but a kind of deep, practiced strength. Howard had met a lot of people in 30 years. He had met very few who had that. He turned away from the chair and walked to his office. On his desk, slipped under the door sometime before 6 a.m., was a folded piece of notepaper. He recognized the handwriting from the signature on the ownership documents he had received 2 years ago. Clean, unhurried, slightly left-leaning. He sat down. He opened it. He read it twice. Then he set it on his desk, face down, and sat very still for a moment, with both hands flat on the desk surface, the way a person sits when they have just received something that needs to be absorbed before it can be acted on. Then he picked up his office phone and made 2 calls. The first was to the head of SC30 Hospitality Holdings Administrative Office, which opened on the East Coast at 9 a.m., 6 a.m. Pacific. The second was to Cornell University's School of Hotel Administration in Ithaca, New York, where the admissions office would open in 3 hours. He left a detailed message on the Cornell voicemail. He was very specific. He had been given very specific instructions. Marcus Delwood arrived at 7 a.m. His shift started at 8. He had set his alarm for 5:30, lain awake until 5:40, and decided at 5:41 that going back to sleep was not something his body was interested in doing this morning. He drove from his apartment in Napa in the thin early light, parked in the staff lot, and sat in his car for a few minutes. Not the way Amara had sat in her car on her first day, breathing and steadying herself, but the way you sit when you are trying to decide what kind of person you are going to be when you walk through a door. He had been asking himself that question since approximately 9:15 the previous evening, when he had read the page Amara had handed him and sat down heavily in the chair behind the desk. He had gone home at 11, after his shift ended. He had made himself dinner, pasta, something simple, and sat at his kitchen table in his apartment in Napa and eaten it slowly and thought about everything. He thought about the man at the counter. He replayed it the way athletes replay game tape, not to punish himself, but to see it clearly. Every moment, every decision, every word. The guest had approached the desk with a soft smile and no demands. He had given a name. He had suggested, helpfully, that there might be a date issue and offered a way to look. When the answer was no, said correctly, professionally, according to every protocol Marcus had been trained on, the guest had not argued, had not escalated, had not asked for a manager, had simply said, "That's okay, I understand," and picked up his bag and gone to sit in a chair. Marcus had watched him go and felt nothing except the clean satisfaction of a protocol followed correctly. That was the thing that troubled him most, sitting at his kitchen table at 11:30 p.m. Not that he had made a mistake. He could live with mistakes. Mistakes were correctable, learnable, part of the honest accounting of doing a job. What troubled him was that in the moment, he had felt nothing wrong. The system had worked as designed. He had followed the process. He had experienced the entire interaction as a success. And somewhere between the desk and the velvet chair, the actual human being in front of him had disappeared from his awareness entirely. He had seen a reservation problem. He had solved the reservation problem. He had not seen Steph Curry. He had not, more importantly, seen a tired man who had driven himself to a hotel after a long day of meetings and asked quietly and without entitlement for a room. He had not seen the person. That was the gap. That was the thing Amara's question had opened up, and his sleepless night had widened until he could see all the way to the bottom of it. What did you see first? The reservation problem or the person? He walked through the staff entrance at 7 a.m., carrying that question like something he intended to set down in the right place. The lobby was still and golden in the early morning. The overnight team had gone. The breakfast service in Fleur would not begin until 7:30. The building had the quality that Howard loved about the 6:30 walk, the sense of a day that had not made any mistakes yet. Marcus went to the front desk. He logged into his terminal. He checked the morning's arrivals and departures. He reviewed the day's reservations with the focused, methodical attention that was native to him, and that was, he understood more clearly this morning than yesterday, genuinely valuable. The system mattered. The process mattered. The details mattered. The thing he had to learn was not to stop seeing the system. The thing he had to learn was to see the person inside it too. Both things. At the same time. Every time. He was thinking about how a person practiced that. How you trained yourself to hold two kinds of seeing simultaneously. When the elevator opened across the lobby, a man in a clean white t-shirt and dark jeans stepped out. Carrying a small duffel bag, Marcus looked up. Their eyes met across the lobby. Marcus had prepared something. He had worked on it in the car. Not a speech, just a few true sentences said in the right order. He had wanted to be ready. He had wanted to do this correctly. Steph walked toward the front desk. He set his duffel bag on the floor. He looked at Marcus with the same quiet, present attention he had given him the night before. The same patient, open face. The one that made you feel that whatever you were about to say had already been received with more grace than you had earned. Marcus straightened up. "Mr. Curry," he said. His voice was level. Deliberately level. Not cold, but controlled. The way you control something when you want it to come out right. "I owe you an apology." Steph said nothing. He waited. Marcus said it. Not perfectly. He had planned to be more organized about it, and he wasn't. The sentences came out slightly out of the order he'd arranged them, and at one point he lost the thread for a moment and had to find it again. But the substance was there, said without excuse, and without the hedging language people use when they want to apologize, without fully accepting what they're apologizing for. He said, "I followed the protocol correctly, and I missed the person entirely. I saw the reservation problem and solved it, and didn't look up from the screen long enough to actually see who was standing in front of me. That's not a systems failure. That's mine." He said, "I grew up learning that rules were how you kept things from falling apart, and I still believe that. But I understand now that rules are the floor, not the ceiling. You follow them so that the minimum is always met. What you do above the floor, That's the actual job. He said, "I'm sorry you sat in that lobby for 47 minutes. That should not have happened. It won't happen again." When he finished, the lobby was very quiet. Steph looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "How long have you been working here?" 8 months, Marcus said. "Do you like it?" The question surprised him, not because it was strange, but because it was so simple and direct and genuine that it cut through everything else. Not "do you understand what you did wrong," or "do you know how serious this was?" Just, "Do you like it?" "Yes," Marcus said. And then, because the question deserved more than one word, "I really do. I think I'm good at it. I want to be better at it." Steph nodded slowly. The nod of someone receiving an honest answer and honoring it. "Then stay," he said, "and remember what last night felt like. Not to punish yourself. Don't do that. That's not useful. Remember it the way athletes remember a game they lost when they should have won. Not for the shame of it, for the information." He paused. "The system is a tool," he said. "The person in front of you is the job." Marcus felt those 2 sentences go somewhere deep and permanent. He would not forget them. He knew this with the certainty you have about things that arrive at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right form. Steph extended his hand. Marcus shook it. One firm pump. Eye contact held. Then Steph reached into his duffel bag. He pulled out a small white envelope. He set it on the desk with a quiet, deliberate placement. Not dropped, not slid, set. The way you set something down when it matters what happens to it next. On the front, in that clean left-leaning handwriting, was written a single word, Amara. "Make sure she gets this," Steph said. "I will," Marcus said. Steph picked up his duffel bag. He walked toward the glass front doors. At the threshold, just before the automatic doors opened into the gold Napa morning, he turned back once. Not dramatically, just the natural turn of someone who has one more thing. "Marcus," he said. "Yes, sir. The morning shift is the best shift." A small smile. "The day hasn't made any mistakes yet." Then the doors opened, and the morning came in, cool and golden and smelling of wet earth and oak and something sweet from the vineyard, and Steph Curry walked through it into the parking lot where his blue Porsche Taycan sat waiting, patient and plain, right where he had left it. Marcus watched him go. He watched the car pull quietly out of the self-parking lot, onto the long olive tree-lined driveway, and then onto the Silverado Trail, heading south in the early light. Then Marcus looked down at the envelope on the desk. Amara. He picked it up. He held it carefully, the way you hold something when you know it belongs to someone else, and that the belonging matters. He did not open it. He did not look inside. He set it gently on the shelf below the desk counter, in the spot where staff left things for each other. Notes, keys, forms requiring signatures. He straightened up. He looked out at the lobby. The velvet chair by the window, the chandelier unlit in the morning, the tall vases of white flowers, the pale limestone floor catching the early sun through the tall glass facade. He thought about what Steph had said. The morning shift is the best shift. The day hasn't made any mistakes yet. He understood that it wasn't just a comment about mornings. It was a comment about what every new shift was, every new interaction, every new person who walked through those doors. To see the person first, the system second, and let the two of them work together the way they were designed to. He took a slow breath. He checked the morning arrivals list. He was ready. Amara Ngozi came through the staff entrance at 11:58 a.m., 2 minutes early, the way she always was. She had slept well, which surprised her. She had expected to lie awake turning the evening over and over, the way you do with things that feel unfinished. But the sleep had come easily and deeply, and she had woken up with the particular clarity that comes after a day when you did something that cost you something, and it turned out to be worth it. She changed into her uniform in the staff room, pressed white shirt, dark trousers, the small name badge that said Amara in clean capital letters. She looked at it for a moment before pinning it on. 6 weeks ago, she had looked at this badge with the nervous pride of someone who had earned entry into a place she wanted to be. This morning, she looked at it differently. Not with less pride, with more. The kind of pride that has been tested and confirmed, rather than simply hoped for. She walked through the service corridor and into the lobby. Marcus was at the front desk. He looked up when she came in. Something in his face was different from the previous night. Not entirely different, not transformed into someone unrecognizable, but different, the way a face is different when the person behind it has spent a night with something honest and come out the other side of it with more room in them than there was before. He reached below the counter without saying anything. He held out the envelope. She looked at it. Her name, in handwriting she did not recognize, clean and unhurried and slightly left-leaning. "He left before 8, Marcus said. "He asked me to make sure you got it." She took the envelope. It was light. Whatever was inside it was not thick, not a package, not a stack of documents. Just a folded letter, maybe 2 sheets, and something small tucked inside. She held it for a moment. "Did he say anything else?" she asked. Marcus thought about it. He said, "The morning shift is the best shift," Marcus said. "The day hasn't made any mistakes yet." Amara looked at him. Then she looked down at the envelope. "I'm going to read this in the break room," she said quietly. "Take your time," Marcus said. She walked through the door behind the desk, down the short corridor, into the small staff break room. A simple room with a round table, 4 chairs, a coffee machine, a window that looked out over the staff parking lot, and, beyond it, the edge of the vineyard. She sat at the table. She set the envelope in front of her. She opened it carefully, not tearing, but pulling the flap back slowly, the way you open something when you understand that the opening is part of it. Inside were 2 things. The first was a handwritten note on plain white paper, 1 page, front only, in that same clean left-leaning handwriting. The second was a folded document, official, headed paper. A logo she recognized. A university crest she had looked at many times on a web page she had bookmarked and returned to and eventually, practically, painfully, closed. She read the note first. "Amara, 6 weeks in, and you already understand the most important thing about this work. It's not about systems. It's not about titles. It's not about knowing who you're serving. It's about choosing to see the person in front of you. You did that last night. Not for me. You didn't even know it was me when you made the decision to cross that lobby. You did it for the job you showed up to do, for the standard you hold yourself to, quietly, when no one is checking. That's rare. Don't let anyone train it out of you. I asked Howard about you. He told me your story. I looked into the rest. You applied to a school that was right for you, and you were right for it. The only thing that stood between you and that door was a number. Numbers are my business. The rest is in here too. Keep going, Amara. The hospitality industry needs people who see. SC 30. She read it once. Then she set it down carefully on the table. She picked up the folded document. She opened it. She read the first line, then the second, then the third. She set it flat on the table in front of her and pressed both palms down on it. Not to hold it still, but because her hands needed to touch something solid. Outside the break room window, the Napa Valley morning was fully arrived now, the fog entirely gone, the vineyard gold and bright in the October sun, the hills beyond it green and close and real. She looked at it. She thought about the previous evening, the man in the gray hoodie, the search on the terminal, the walk across the lobby, the 2 words. Then handle it. She thought about 6 weeks of being careful, of staying in her lane, of deciding, daily and without drama, that speaking up could wait until she was more established, more certain, more sure she had earned the right. She thought about the moment she had stopped waiting. She thought about what that moment had cost her. a shaking walk across a limestone floor, a heart too loud in her chest, a voice she was not certain would come out steady. And she thought about what it had given her. Not just the document on the table in front of her, though the document on the table in front of her was, in the most practical sense, the document that changed the shape of her future. But something before that, something that had happened between the decision and the outcome, in the space of a walk across a lobby, that had quietly and permanently altered the way she understood herself. She was not the person who waited until she was sure. She was the person who crossed the room. She had always been that person. She had just needed a Thursday evening in October, and a man in a gray hoodie, and 2 quiet words, to remember it. Her eyes filled. She did not fight it. She put her face in her hands and she cried. The kind of tears that are not sad and not entirely happy, but are the specific release of a person who has been holding something tightly for a long time, and has finally, in a quiet room with a view of a vineyard, been given permission to set it down. She cried for maybe 2 minutes. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand. She picked up the note. She folded it carefully along its original crease. She placed it back in the envelope. She picked up the document. She looked at it one more time. The university crest, the formal language, the specific and unambiguous generosity of what it contained. A full scholarship, tuition, housing, living stipend. Cornell University's School of Hotel Administration, beginning August 2024. She folded it back along its crease. She placed it in the envelope with the note. She held the envelope in both hands for a moment. Then she stood up. She straightened her uniform. She looked at her name badge. Amara. She took one slow breath. She walked back out to the front desk. Marcus looked up when she came back. He looked at her face, at the brightness in her eyes and the steadiness in her chin, and the particular quality of someone who has just been handed something enormous and chosen to carry it with grace, rather than collapse under it. He did not ask what was in the envelope. He did not need to. He could see it, not the contents, the effect. The way it had landed in her, the way she was standing differently, not taller exactly, but more fully inside herself. The way people stand when they have been confirmed in something they already knew was true about themselves, but needed the world to say back to them. "Good?" he said. She looked at him. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Good." She logged into her terminal. The lobby was warm and golden around them. Outside, the Napa Valley went about the easy business of a Friday morning in October. Vineyard workers moving through the rows, a delivery van turning off the Silverado Trail, 2 guests from an upstairs room walking hand in hand toward the entrance of Fleur for breakfast. The day had not made any mistakes yet. And at the front desk of the Grand Pelican Resort, 2 young people stood side by side, one who had learned something the night before that he would carry for the rest of his career, and one who was about to begin the next chapter of a life that had quietly, irrevocably, expanded. The lobby was exactly what it was supposed to be. It felt like someone had built it carefully. It felt like someone in there was glad you came. The breakfast service at Fleur began at 7:30 every morning. It was, in the opinion of most guests who experienced it, the best meal the restaurant served, not because the food was more technically accomplished than dinner, but because of what breakfast in that room felt like. The light came in from the east-facing windows in long, low bars of gold, falling across the white linen tablecloths and the small vases of seasonal flowers, and the steam rising from coffee poured into wide ceramic cups. The vineyard was visible through the glass, close and real and alive with morning, and sitting in that room with good coffee and good bread, and the valley spread out before you felt, as more than one guest had written in reviews, like being forgiven for everything that had been difficult about the previous week. Chef René Dorville was not in the dining room during breakfast service. He was in the kitchen, as he always was, at the pass by 6:45, reviewing the morning prep with his sous chef, a focused young woman named Celestine Adair, who had trained under René for 2 years. and had recently been told, quietly and directly, that she was ready to run her own kitchen when the right opportunity presented itself. Renee had told her this on a Tuesday afternoon in September, standing at the prep counter after service. He had said it the way he said most important things, without preamble, without sentimentality, simply and completely, as though the truth of it was self-evident and only needed to be named. Celestine had said nothing for a moment. Then she had said, "How will I know when it's the right opportunity?" Renee had thought about it. "You'll know," he said, "because it will ask more of you than you think you're ready for. That's always how you know." Celestine had written that down in the notebook she kept in her chef's coat pocket. It was still there. At 7:55 a.m. on Friday, October 13th, Howard Pitts walked into the kitchen. He did not come into the kitchen often, not because he wasn't welcome, but because he respected the separation between front of house and back of house that was, in his experience, essential to the functioning of a good property. The kitchen was Renee's domain. Howard's was the lobby, the corridors, the guest experience. They intersected at the pass, where food traveled from one world into the other, and that intersection worked because both men understood exactly where their territory ended. But this morning, Howard came in. Renee looked up from the pass. Howard said, "Do you have a minute?" Renee handed his clipboard to Celestine and walked to the far end of the kitchen, where the dry storage room door stood open, and the corridor was quiet. Howard told him, "Not everything, not the ownership, not the lobby, not the 47 minutes." He told Renee the part that was Renee's, that the late plate he had sent out the previous evening had been for a very particular guest, and that the guest had sent a specific message back through Howard this morning, written in the note that had been slipped under Howard's office door before 6 a.m. Howard read the relevant section aloud. It said, "Tell your chef that the short rib was the best thing I ate all year. 6 hours of patience on a plate. In a year with a lot of good meals, that one was different. It tasted like someone actually cared. Please make sure he knows that." Renee listened. He looked at Howard. He looked at the middle distance for a moment. The particular look of a man processing a compliment that has arrived in a form he did not expect, and that has, despite his best defenses against sentimentality, gotten through. Then he said, "Who was the guest?" Howard told him. Renee was quiet for a considerably longer moment this time. He looked at Howard. He looked at the middle distance again. Then he turned and walked back to the pass without a word, picked up his clipboard from Celestine, and returned his attention to the morning prep list. Celestine watched him. She had worked alongside Renee for 2 years. She had seen him receive a Michelin star with a handshake and a nod. She had seen him handle a full Saturday service with 2 staff members out sick and a malfunctioning oven without raising his voice once. She had seen him cry exactly once, the morning he got the call that his grandmother in Port-au-Prince had passed, and he had stood at the sink with his back to the kitchen for approximately 90 seconds before turning around and returning to work. He was, in her experience, not a man who was easily reached. But she could see something in him now, in the set of his jaw and the extra stillness in his hands as he reviewed the prep list, that told her something had arrived this morning, that had gotten through whatever Renee used to keep the world at a manageable distance. She did not ask. She gave him the same thing she had been given when his grandmother died. 90 seconds, and the dignity of privacy. Then she said, "Brioche is out of the proofer. Ready when you are." "Good," Renee said. He set down the clipboard. He walked to the bread station. He checked the brioche with the focused, present attention he brought to everything, pressing the dough gently, reading its resistance, making the small, wordless assessment that 23 years of cooking had built into his hands. He nodded once. "Bake it," he said. Celestine slid the tray into the oven. Renee stood at the bread station for a moment longer than necessary. Nobody in the kitchen remarked on it, but Celestine, from the corner of her eye, saw him do something she had not seen him do at the bread station before. He put one hand flat on the counter, just rested it there, the way a person rests a hand on something solid when they need a moment to feel the weight of what they are doing. Then he moved on. The kitchen went about its morning. Tommy Osei arrived for his shift at 10 a.m. He came through the staff entrance, changed into his uniform, and walked through the service corridor toward the restaurant, and stopped at the kitchen pass to check the day's lunch setup, the way he had been taught to do every morning before service. Renee was at the pass. He looked up when Tommy stopped. There was a moment between them, brief and quiet. The kind of moment that doesn't need to be named to be understood by both people in it. Renee said, "You carried the plate well last night." Tommy said, "You cooked it well." Renee almost smiled, that rare, controlled almost smile that Celestine had learned to recognize as the closest thing to unguarded warmth that Renee regularly permitted himself during kitchen hours. "Go set up the dining room," Renee said. "Yes, chef." Tommy walked through the pass door into the restaurant. He had told no one, not his roommate, who had been awake when Tommy got home and had asked how work was, not his mother in Calistoga, who called most mornings at 9, and had called this morning and asked the same question she asked every morning. "How was it? Are you learning things?" He had said, "Good, yes." He had not said, "I carried dinner to Stephen Curry last night and didn't know it, and it was somehow the most important thing I've ever done." He had not said it because he was still figuring out exactly what it meant, still turning it over, examining it from different angles, the way you examine something that arrived too large and too fast to be fully processed at the moment of impact. What he kept coming back to was this. He had carried the plate knowing only that someone was hungry, and that Chef Renee had cooked something with patience and care. He had carried it correctly because the work deserved to be done correctly, not because he knew who would receive it, not because he was being watched, not because there was a reward attached to the doing. He had done it because it was right to do it, and then it had turned out to matter enormously. He was beginning to understand that this was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. The people who did the work right when nobody was watching were the people who were ready when it turned out that somebody was. He would think about this for a long time. He would, eventually, in a life that turned out to be shaped significantly by the hospitality industry, by kitchens and dining rooms, and the particular human transaction of feeding people well, understand it completely. But that was later. Right now he had a dining room to set up. He went about it with care. At 10:30 a.m., Howard Pitts was in his office. He had the note on his desk, the one that had been slipped under his door before 6, now carefully unfolded and reread and folded again. He would have it framed, he had decided. Not to display it publicly. That was not the kind of thing you put on a wall where guests could see it and think it was a trophy. But somewhere private, somewhere that was for him and for the staff, as a reminder of the standard the building was supposed to hold itself to. He looked at the wall behind his desk. The framed card was there. Treat people the way he would want to be treated if no one knew who he was. He had put it there 2 years ago, when the ownership had transferred, and read it every morning as part of the quiet liturgy of starting a workday correctly. He took it down. He read it again. He thought about Thursday evening, the 47 minutes, the velvet chair, the conversation that had started with him having no script and ended with him laughing in a way he hadn't expected. He thought about what Steph had said. "I bought this place because I believed in what it could feel like, not the chandeliers. The feeling." He thought about Amara, walking across the lobby. He thought about Marcus, arriving an hour early this morning. He thought about Tommy, carrying the tray. He thought about Renee, standing at the pass at 10:15 on a Thursday night, making something beautiful for a person he would never meet. He thought, the card behind the desk is fine. The card behind the desk is correct. But a principle written on a card and a principle lived in a building are two different things. and the distance between them is not bridged by the right words framed in the right place. It is bridged by the people who walk across lobbies. He set the old card to one side. He opened his desk drawer and took out a plain note card and a pen. He wrote slowly. When he was done, he read it back. It said, "The feeling is the point. Everything else is how we get there." He looked at it for a long moment. Then he had it framed before the end of the business day. A simple black frame, nothing ornate, and hung it on the wall behind his desk, in the spot where the old card had been. He sent a message to all department heads that afternoon, a brief, specific note asking them to gather their teams at the start of the following week for a conversation about guest experience. Not a policy review, not a protocol refresher, a conversation. He did not mention Thursday evening in the message. He did not need to. The conversation would get there on its own. Marcus Delwood's shift ended at 4 p.m. He stayed until 4:20, finishing a handover note for the evening shift that was more detailed than usual. Specific observations about 2 guests he had interacted with during the day. Small preferences he had noticed that were worth passing along. An older gentleman in room 14 who had mentioned, offhandedly, that he preferred his morning newspaper folded rather than rolled. A woman checking in at 2 p.m. whose reservation showed a king bed, but who had asked, quietly, whether a room with 2 queens might be available. She hadn't explained why, but Marcus had made a note and flagged it for the evening team to address. He had noticed these things the way he had not noticed the man in the gray hoodie the previous night. He was practicing. He walked out to the staff parking lot at 4:22. He stood beside his car for a moment in the afternoon sun, the valley golden and warm around him, the vineyard rows casting long shadows across the road, the air carrying that late afternoon sweetness that Napa Valley produced in October like a last, generous gift before winter. He thought about something Steph had said this morning. Remember what last night felt like. Not to punish yourself. For the information. He was keeping it. He was filing it in the part of himself where he kept things that were going to be useful for a long time. Not as a wound, not as a shame, but as a calibration. A precise, specific, permanent calibration of the gap between following the rules and doing the job. He got in his car. He drove home to his apartment in Napa. He made dinner. He sat at the kitchen table. This time, he did not stare at the ceiling. He ate slowly, and thought about tomorrow, and felt, for the first time since 9:15 the previous evening, like something had been set right. Not erased, set right. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. He was beginning to understand all the ways it mattered. Amara's shift ended at 8 p.m. She had worked a full day, 8 hours at the front desk, checking in 12 guests, handling 2 reservation modifications, responding to a noise complaint from the 3rd floor with the calm efficiency of someone who had absorbed the protocols and was beginning to move inside them rather than simply follow them. She had been good at the work before Thursday evening. She was better at it today, not because anything technical had changed, because something inside the technical had shifted, a quality of attention, an additional layer of presence, the way you work when you understand not just what you are doing, but why the doing of it matters, at the level where it actually touches people. She had kept the envelope in her locker all day. She had not taken it out again. She did not need to reread it. She had it memorized, the way you memorize things that arrive in the exact shape of something you needed to hear. At 8 p.m. she logged out of her terminal, said goodnight to the evening shift staff, and walked through the staff corridor to the locker room. She changed out of her uniform. She took the envelope from her locker. She held it for a moment. Then she put it carefully in the inside pocket of her jacket, close to her chest, the way you carry things you are not yet ready to put down. She walked out to the staff parking lot. The night was clear. The fog had not come back tonight, and the sky above the valley was enormous and full of stars, the kind of sky that cities bury under light and that Napa Valley, blessedly, had not. She stood in the parking lot and looked up at it. She thought about Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, a campus she had looked at in photographs so many times that she felt she knew the shape of it, the stone buildings and the gorges and the long green quad, and the hotel school building where people went to learn the precise science and imprecise art of making other people feel at home in the world. She had wanted it so much that she had made herself stop wanting it, the way you stop wanting things that feel too large for your current circumstances. She was going to have to learn how to want it again. That was okay. She was good at learning. She got in her car. She sat for a moment. Not the nervous sitting of her first morning, but the quiet sitting of someone who has had a significant day and wants to feel the full weight of it before driving away. Then she started the engine. She pulled out of the staff parking lot, onto the long driveway lined with olive trees and soft lantern lights, and turned onto the Silverado Trail heading south. The valley spread out around her, dark and gold and enormous and real. She drove through it thinking about all the things that had changed in the past 24 hours, and all the things that had not changed, and the important difference between the two. What had changed? The shape of her future. The document in her inside pocket. The understanding, now confirmed and irrevocable, that speaking up was not a risk to be managed, but a responsibility to be honored. What had not changed? Who she was. What she cared about. The instinct that had sent her walking across a lobby toward a man in a gray hoodie at 9 p.m. on a Thursday, not because she knew what it would cost or what it would give, but because something in her had looked at the situation and known, simply and completely, that it was the right thing to do. That had always been there. It would always be there. The valley went past her windows, dark and beautiful. She drove on. In the Monarch Suite on the 5th floor of the Grand Pelican Resort, the housekeeper, a quiet, meticulous woman named Petra Voss, who had worked at the property since its opening in 2019, turned down the bed with the focused care she brought to every room, every day, regardless of who had slept there. She smoothed the linen. She adjusted the pillows. She placed the small card on the nightstand, the nightly turn-down card that every guest received, printed with the next day's weather and a short quote that Howard changed each week. This week's quote, which Howard had selected the previous Sunday without knowing what Thursday evening would bring, read, "The most important thing is to try and inspire people so that they can be great in whatever they want to do." Kobe Bryant. Petra read it, the way she read it every week. Then she turned off the bedside lamp, leaving only the soft glow of the entry light. She closed the door behind her. The suite was empty and quiet and perfectly made. Outside its window, the Napa Valley stretched out under the stars. The vineyard rose silver in the moonlight, the hills dark and close, the Silverado Trail, a thin ribbon of road running through the heart of it all. Everything still, everything exactly as it should be. The door that had taken the longest to open, the one that mattered most, was open now. For everyone who had been in that building on Thursday evening, something had passed through it, and none of them would ever stand in a lobby, or carry a plate, or wipe down a counter, or smooth a linen, quite the same way again. This is the part of the story we have been building toward. From the very first sentence, a man in a gray hoodie walking up the front steps of a luxury resort on a warm Thursday evening in October, there has been something waiting at the end of this road. Something the title promised, and the story has been slowly, carefully earning the right to deliver. You have waited for it, the way Steph Curry waited in that velvet chair. Patiently, without demanding it arrive before it was ready. It is ready now. Here is what was in the envelope. But first, because the envelope deserves its full context, because the document inside it only means what it means when you understand the full shape of the life it was handed to. Here is what happened in the weeks and months after that Thursday evening in October. To each of the people who were in that building when a man in a gray hoodie sat down in a velvet chair and waited for a door to open. Tommy Osei told no one for 3 weeks. He carried it the way he had carried the plate, carefully, with both hands, understanding that the weight of it was real, and that it deserved to be set down in the right place at the right time. The right time came on a Sunday evening in early November, sitting at his mother's kitchen table in Calistoga, a small house on a quiet street, where he had grown up, and where his mother, Grace Osei, had raised him mostly alone after his father had moved back to Ghana when Tommy was 9, and where the kitchen table had always been the place where important things were said, because Grace had made it that way, had made that table the safest place in Tommy's world, since before he had words for what safe felt like. He told her the whole story. Grace listened with her coffee cup held in both hands, and her eyes on her son's face, the way mothers look at their children when they are watching something true happen in real time. When Tommy finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And you didn't know who he was when you carried the plate?" "No," Tommy said. "You just carried it well because that was the right way to carry it." "Yes," she nodded, slowly, the deep, satisfied nod of a woman whose long investment in the character of another human being has just been confirmed. "Baby," she said, "that's the whole lesson, that's everything." Tommy looked at his mother. He thought about Chef Renee at the bread station, one hand flat on the counter. He thought about Amara walking across the lobby. He thought about the window on the 5th floor with its light on. "I know," he said. Grace reached across the table and put her hand over his. They sat like that for a while, in the warm kitchen, in the house where Tommy had grown up, at the table where important things were said. Outside, the Napa Valley was quiet and dark and full of stars. Chef René Dorville received his 2nd Michelin star in January 2024. The announcement came in the way Michelin announcements come, quietly, officially, without drama. A letter that arrived at the restaurant and was opened by Celestine Adair because René was at the fish market in San Francisco and had left her in charge of the morning, which he did with increasing frequency because he was, in the way of people who understand legacy, already thinking about what came after him. Celestine called him. He was standing at a fish stall in the Ferry Building marketplace, holding a whole branzino and examining its eyes the way he always examined fish, with the focused, unhurried attention of a man for whom freshness was not a preference, but a moral position. She told him. He set the branzino down carefully. He thanked the fishmonger, who had no idea what had just happened on the phone, but could tell from the quality of the silence that something significant had passed through it. René drove back to Napa. He did not call anyone else. He did not post anything. He walked back into his kitchen at 2 p.m., tied his apron, and began the afternoon prep with his team. At 4 o'clock, he called the kitchen together at the pass. He told them. The kitchen erupted. The sous chef, the prep cooks, the dishwashers, Tommy Osei at the back of the group with his wide, easy smile. The particular eruption of people who work hard, and mostly invisibly, and have just been told by the most rigorous authority in their industry that the work is seen and that it is excellent. René let it happen. He stood at the pass and let the noise wash over him and did not try to contain it or redirect it. Then, when it had run its natural course, he said, "This is not mine. This belongs to every person who has stood in this kitchen and cooked something with care for a person they would never meet. That is what this is for. Now let's prep." The kitchen went back to work. Later that evening, after service, René sat alone at the prep counter with a glass of the 2019 Schaefer Hillside Select, the same wine he had sent out with the short rib on that Thursday evening in October, from his private bottle, the one he kept for moments that deserved it. He thought about his grandmother in Port-au-Prince. He thought about the stool beside her stove. He thought about a man he had never met, in a lobby he never entered, who had eaten something he made with 6 hours of patience and said it tasted like someone actually cared. He drank the wine slowly. He sat with the full weight of it. Then he washed the glass himself, dried it, put it back on the shelf, turned off the kitchen lights, and went home. Marcus Delwood was promoted to Guest Relations Supervisor in March 2024. Howard Pitts called him into his office on a Tuesday morning in late February and told him it was coming. He told him specifically why, not in the vague language of performance reviews but directly, naming the things Marcus had done in the month since October that had demonstrated a quality of growth that Howard considered both rare and essential. He told him about the handover notes, the increasingly detailed, increasingly human notes that Marcus had begun writing at the end of every shift, cataloging not just operational information, but guest observations. The gentleman who preferred his newspaper folded. The woman who needed 2 queens. The family checking in on a Friday, who had a child with a dietary restriction they had not included in their reservation, but had mentioned offhandedly at the desk, and which Marcus had quietly flagged to the kitchen before they reached the restaurant. He told him about the morning a guest had arrived at the front desk upset, not about the hotel, about something in her personal life that had bled into her check-in, in the way that people's lives sometimes bleed into hotel lobbies, because hotels are where people go when things are significant, and significant things carry their own weather. Marcus had not processed her as a check-in problem. He had slowed down. He had been present. He had handled her with a gentleness that had prompted her, 3 days later, to leave a written note at the front desk, addressed specifically to him, which Howard had read and kept. He told Marcus all of this. Then he said, "You know what changed?" Marcus said, "Yes." Howard said, "Tell me." Marcus thought about it for a moment, not because he didn't know, but because he wanted to say it precisely. "I started seeing the person first," he said. "The system is still there. I still follow it. But it goes second now." "The person goes first." Howard nodded. "That's the job," he said. Marcus became Guest Relations Supervisor, effective March 1st, 2024. On his first day in the role, he gathered his small team of 3 at the front desk before the morning shift began and told them one thing: not a protocol, not a policy, not a rule from the manual. He said, "When someone walks through those doors, before you look at your screen, look at them. Really look. That's where we start." He had not planned the speech. It had simply arrived, the way things arrive when they have been lived first. His team looked at him. Then they looked at the doors. They were ready. Howard Pitts made one change to the Grand Pelican staff orientation program in November 2023. He added a single session, 45 minutes, at the end of the first week, after all the policies and procedures and systems had been covered. He called it simply the feeling. In it, he did not use slides or handouts or training videos. He brought new staff into the lobby. He asked them to sit, not at the desk, not behind a terminal, but in the chairs, the guest chairs. The velvet chairs and the linen sofas and the seats by the windows where guests sat when they arrived, and when they waited, and when they watched the vineyard and felt, in whatever particular way was true for them, something they had needed to feel. He asked them to sit in those chairs and look at the room from the inside of it, to feel what it felt like to be received rather than to receive. Then he told them, not a story about a famous person, because that was not the point and had never been the point, but a story about a Thursday evening in October when a guest sat in the lobby for 47 minutes, and the person who changed everything was a young woman 6 weeks into her first job who walked across a room because she saw a person and understood that the seeing was the job. He told it every orientation. He told it the same way every time. And every time, without exception, something shifted in the room. A quality of attention, a reorientation of what the new staff understood they were actually there to do. The card on his office wall said, "The feeling is the point. Everything else is how we get there." He read it every morning. He meant it more every month. And now, Amara. On a Tuesday morning in May 2024, 7 months after that Thursday evening in October, and 3 months after she had submitted her enrollment confirmation to Cornell University's School of Hotel Administration, Amara Ngozi stood in front of a lecture hall at San Francisco State University. She was 23 years old. She had been invited to speak to the graduating class of the Hospitality and Tourism Management program, the same program she had completed the previous May, in the same building, in a city she had made her own over 4 years of early mornings and late study sessions, and the particular education of a person who knew exactly what she wanted and was willing to work in the exact direction of it every single day. She was not a famous person. She was not, yet, someone the industry had written about, or celebrated, or held up as a name to know. She was a 23-year-old woman who had worked the front desk of a Napa Valley resort for 8 months, and who was about to begin the best hospitality management program in the world on a full scholarship, and who had been asked to speak because her former professor, the one who had called her senior thesis the best he had read in 8 years, had heard what had happened in October and called her in January and said simply, "Amara, come and talk to my graduating class. Tell them what you told me about that night. Tell them the whole thing." She stood at the podium. The hall was full. Graduating students in their seats, families along the sides and back, faculty in the first rows. The particular hushed energy of a room full of people at the threshold of something. She looked out at them. She had prepared a speech. She had written it carefully, revised it 4 times, read it aloud in her apartment until it flowed without effort. She set it aside. She spoke from what she knew. She told them about Thursday, October 12, 2023. She told them about the man in the gray hoodie and the worn sneakers and the single duffel bag. She told them about the wrong check-in date and the full hotel and the front desk and the velvet chair. She told them what she had noticed: the shoes, the hands, the quality of his stillness. She told them about the search on the terminal, about the ownership record, about the feeling of the floor tilting and her hands gripping the edge of the desk. She told them about walking across the lobby. She did not dramatize it. She told it simply, the way it had actually been. The shaking hands, the loud heartbeat, the voice that came out steadier than she had expected, because something underneath the fear was steadier than the fear. She told them about the 2 words, "Then handle it." She told them what she had done next. She told them about Howard arriving in his reading glasses, wet at the shoulders from the rain. She told them about the conversation in the velvet chair that she could not hear but could see. The rigid shoulders coming down, the hand over the eyes, the real laugh in the middle of a serious thing. She told them about the envelope on the desk the next morning, with her name on it in clean left-leaning handwriting. She told them what was in it. The hall was very quiet when she got to that part. Not the uncomfortable quiet of an audience waiting for the next thing. The full, held quiet of people receiving something. She let it sit for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be clear about something. The scholarship changed my life in ways I am still understanding. It gave me a door I thought had closed. It gave me a future shaped like the one I had always imagined, and I am grateful for it every single day, in a way I don't have adequate words for." She paused. "But that is not the most important thing that happened that night." The hall waited. "The most important thing," she said, "happened before I knew who he was. It happened when I looked at a man sitting in a chair and noticed that he was not angry when he should have been. It happened when something in me said, 'That matters. Pay attention.' It happened when I made the decision to cross the room before I knew what crossing the room would cost me or give me." She looked out at the graduating class. Young faces, nervous faces, faces full of the particular mixture of excitement and terror that belongs to people standing at the beginning of something real. "The hospitality industry will teach you systems," she said. "It will teach you protocols and policies and procedures. It will teach you how to run a front desk and manage a reservation and handle a service failure. All of that is real, and all of it matters, and you should learn every bit of it. She leaned forward slightly on the podium. But here is the thing they cannot put in a manual. The thing that no training program, no textbook, no amount of correct procedure will ever give you. She waited one beat. The willingness to see the person. She let it land. Not the reservation. Not the complaint. Not the check-in time or the room type or the loyalty tier. The person. The human being who walked through the door carrying whatever they are carrying. Their tiredness, their celebration, their grief, their hope, their ordinary Thursday evening, and chose your building to carry it in. She straightened up. That choice they made, to come through your door, is an act of trust. They are trusting that someone in there will be glad they came. Your job, every shift, every interaction, every single time, is to be that someone. She paused one final time. She thought about a man in a velvet chair, watching fog roll in over a vineyard he had bought because it felt like everything. She thought about two words. Cross the room, she said. Every time. Even when you're not sure. Especially when you're not sure. Because the person in the chair is always worth crossing the room for. She stepped back from the podium. The hall came up, the particular sound of an audience rising, not from politeness but from something that had moved through the room and needed somewhere to go. She stood at the podium and received it, not with the performed humility of someone pretending they didn't work for this moment. With the genuine, open-hearted grace of someone who had learned, in a lobby, on a Thursday, crossing a floor of pale limestone toward a man who had every reason to be angry and every quality to be kind. That being received well is not a gift you are given. It is a gift you earn, by seeing, by crossing the room, by handling it. She enrolled at Cornell University's School of Hotel Administration in August 2024. She was 23 years old. She carried one thing with her from the Grand Pelican. Not the uniform, not the name badge, not the handover notes or the training manuals. She carried the envelope. It lived in the inside pocket of the jacket she had worn home on that Friday night in October. The jacket she had folded carefully and kept on the top shelf of her closet, taking it out occasionally not to wear, but simply to hold the inside pocket and feel the paper inside it. She would not throw it away. Not ever. It was, in the most literal sense, the document that had changed her future. But more than that, more than the scholarship, more than Cornell, more than everything the document itself represented, it was the proof of something she needed to keep close. The proof that seeing matters. That crossing the room matters. That the person in the velvet chair, tired, patient, watching the fog come in over a vineyard he had, quietly, privately, lovingly made his own, had sat for 47 minutes in a lobby, waiting not for someone to recognize him, but for someone to simply see him, and that she had. And that it had been enough. It had been, in fact, everything. Steph Curry has never spoken publicly about the evening of October 12, 2023. He has not tweeted it, posted it, mentioned it in interviews, or included it in any of the many profiles written about him in the months and years that followed. He went on to play the 2023-24 NBA season with the Golden State Warriors, navigating what was by any measure one of the more complicated chapters of his career. A team in transition, questions about the future, the particular weight of being a legend in a league that is always moving toward its next one. He handled it the way he handled Thursday evening in October, quietly, patiently, with his eyes on the person in front of him rather than the noise around him. He did not need the story to be told. He had already received what he came for, a plate of short rib cooked with 6 hours of patience. A young woman who walked across a room, and the quiet, private confirmation that the building he had bought, because it felt like everything, still did. The velvet chair by the window of the Grand Pelican lobby is still there. Nobody moved it. Nobody needed to. It sits in the same spot, beside the window that looks out over the vineyard rows, under the warm amber of the chandelier light, next to the side table where a glass of still water was once placed on a small silver tray by a 22-year-old woman who noticed something nobody else noticed and decided that noticing was not enough. Guests sit in it every day. They look out at the vineyard. They feel, though they could not tell you exactly why, and though no sign marks the chair as anything other than a comfortable place to sit, that someone in this building is genuinely glad they came. They are right. Someone is. Someone always will be. And that is the story of the night Steph Curry sat in the lobby of his own hotel, quiet, patient, and completely unseen, until one person chose to look closer and changed everything. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching this from? I want to know if we have people from New York, from London, from Lagos, from Mumbai, from every corner of this world, because this channel reaches places I never imagined, and every single comment reminds me why we tell these stories. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how you see the people around you, if it reminded you that kindness is always worth the risk, if it made you want to be a little more like Amara and a little less afraid to cross the room, then do one simple thing right now. Hit that like button, not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because every time you like a video like this one, you are telling the world that stories about human decency deserve to be heard. You are voting for kindness with your thumb. And in a world that sometimes makes it hard to believe in people, that vote matters more than you know. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and join a community of people who believe that the most powerful stories are not about money or fame or power. They are about the moments when an ordinary person in an ordinary place chooses to do an extraordinary thing. Spread this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere out there is a person sitting in a velvet chair, waiting for someone to cross the room. Be that person. The next story is on the screen right now. Click it. I will see you there.